Chapter 126 Young man, be restrained. The huge rusty anchor slowly rose out of the water under the drag of the chain, rippling the sea. At sunset, the setting sun dragged the shadow of the warship very long. After a fierce fight with Zephyr, Zhongguo finally won the custody of Darren. He placed Darren in the cabin of his ship and asked the accompanying military doctor to treat his injuries. Then he turned to Garp, who was sitting on the Doghead warship and eating donuts, and shouted, "Hey, Garp, are you sure you don't want to go back to the headquarters?" Garp waved his hand carelessly and grinned, "No, I just received the latest news. The target of Darren and Sakaski's mission. The kid named Douglas Barrett has joined the Roger Pirates. I have to go there. We can't let Roger continue to grow and become stronger." Hearing Garp's words, Zhongguo was slightly startled. He had forgotten about this. Douglas Barrett was captured by Kaido together with Darren, but he didn't find him when he looked back. "I have to ask Darren, that stinky boy, what happened to Barrett?" "Okay, be careful on the road." Zhongguo didn't continue to persuade him. After all, as a comrade for many years, he knows Garp's character better than anyone else, and no one can stop him from making a decision. And Roger's strength. In the Navy, only Garp can suppress him. Still a little short, the domineering old man Kong is no problem. But the old man is old, for safety reasons, he is generally not allowed to go to the front line of the mission. Watching the unique Doghead warship gradually go away, dragging a long wave mark in the afterglow of the sunset, Zhongguo exhaled a breath of foul air with some fatigue. "Let's go back to the headquarters." Zhongguo casually gave an order to his personal soldiers, turned around and rolled his eyes, and said unhappily, "Zephyr, don't you have your own ship? Why do you always come to my warship?" Zephyr crossed his arms, stared at Zhongguo vigilantly, and sneered. "I won't be fooled by you, you just want to get rid of me so that you can cultivate feelings with Darren." Zhongguo's head was full of black lines, and he gritted his teeth and said, "That's because there is a military doctor accompanying my warship. And the cabin is more spacious and comfortable." Zephyr curled his lips and said sarcastically, "Okay, I know that your warship is equipped with rich configurations as a Navy admiral, why are you showing off here?" "Zhongguo. You were also a Navy admiral. You quit, so the level of the warship was lowered, who can you blame?" Blue veins popped out on his forehead. One by one, they either don't do anything or just retire. In the end, all the troubles are thrown to me. If nothing goes wrong, they are wise generals. If something goes wrong, they are retarded. Zhongguo feels really tired. Really, let's destroy it. He didn't bother to pay attention to Zephyr, who was gradually assimilated because he often played with Garp recently. He turned around angrily and walked into the cabin. Zephyr quickly followed him. "Doctor, how is Darren?" In the cabin, Zhongguo looked at the young Navy who was sleeping with an IV drip, and then looked at the kimono girl who was sitting next to him. Finally, his eyes fell on the accompanying military doctor and asked, "Commodore Darren's physical fitness is something I have never seen in decades of medical practice." The middle-aged doctor wearing rimless glasses sighed. "Almost every 10 minutes, Commodore Darren's injuries will improve significantly. This is incredible." He looked at Darren as if he was looking at a priceless rare work of art. General Sengoku can rest assured. At this rate, Commodore Darren will recover in less than a day or two. Sengoku and Zephyr breathed a sigh of relief. First, he was imprisoned and tortured by Kaido for such a long time, and then he dragged his seriously injured body to escape from the siege of the Beast's pirates. After finally escaping, he fought with the world's strongest man, Whitebeard, and almost killed his sworn brother. In just less than 10 days, Darren, this brat, experienced more dangerous, exciting, and ups and downs than most people in the world in their entire lives. Although they were very confident in Darren's strength, facing so many top powerhouses in succession, Sengoku and Zephyr didn't say it, but they were worried that he would suffer some irreparable injuries. "What's wrong with him now?" Zephyr frowned as he looked at Darren's thin, shriveled face like a skeleton. Zhongguo also looked worried. The military doctor said slowly, "This is a sign of excessive physical and mental overdraft." He pushed the nose pad of his glasses with his fingers and said carefully, "I have already given him a nutrient injection. I think there will be no problem after a few days of good conditioning. Excessive physical and mental overdraft. Zhang Guo and Zephyr couldn't help but look at each other, with doubts flashing in their eyes. This is unlikely, Doctor, are you sure you didn't make a mistake? Zephyr frowned and said. Darren's physical strength is better than anyone else. Drag a warship with bare hands, carry a ton of weight and run 10 kilometers without breathing. That physical strength and energy are simply not something that humans can measure. How could it be possible to be exhausted? Zhang Guo also agreed deeply. Not to mention training. When he was in the North Sea, he had personally witnessed Darren's terrifyingly vigorous energy. The reception of the world's nobles, the continuous social activities, the drinking at various parties day and night, but Darren was like nothing happened, smoking and drinking all the time. If you say that he was exhausted, Zhang Guo was the first one who didn't believe it. Is it because of the previous battle or the torture in prison that caused hidden injuries in his body? He couldn't help asking. This. The military doctor pondered for a moment and said slowly. General Darren's condition is generally not caused by fighting. Then what caused it? Zephyr asked. The doctor hesitated for a moment and hesitantly said. Excessive indulgence. Zhang Guo. Zephyr. They seemed to realize something, and turned their heads in unison to look at the gentle and charming kimono girl sitting beside the bed. Tian Yushi looked at the strange eyes of the three old men and was stunned at first. She immediately seemed to understand something, stood up with a red face, and hurriedly explained. It's not me. I didn't. No, Mr. Darren and I didn't. The voice gradually became as low as a mosquito. But he was anxious, this can't be explained clearly. Looking at Tian Yushi's rebuttal. The military doctor raised his glasses mysteriously, without saying anything, but his expression was extremely firm. Zephyr's mouth twitched. He glanced at the beautiful Tian Yushi, then at the haggard Darren, and after a long time, he muffled a sentence. Ahem, young man, pay attention to moderation. Tian Yushi's face suddenly turned red to the root of her neck, as if she was about to cry. This is an innocent and good girl, but she was ruined by Darren, a stinky boy. Seeing this scene, Zhang Guo felt helpless and supported his forehead with his hand. He forced a kind smile on his face, walked over and comforted. It's okay, I will let Darren treat you well, come back to the headquarters with us first, okay? That's right. Zeph next to him also patted his chest indignantly, gritting his teeth and said. If Darren, the bastard, dares to let you down, I will be the first to not forgive him. It was useless to defend himself, and the powerful old man in front of him said so. Tian Yushi could only nod with a red face and said, softly. What a beast. Seeing Tian Yushi's well-behaved and lovely appearance, the fatherly love, hidden in the hearts of Zhang Guo and Zephyr burst out all at once. One of them is an old bachelor, and the other has passed away. In addition to the sense of mission as a navy, they naturally have a fatherly desire to protect a delicate little girl like Tian Yushi. It has to be admitted that Darren, this bastard, is excellent, but he is a gangster and a scum. As a result, they felt great sympathy for Tian Yushi. Thinking of Darren's past, romantic history, Zhang Guo and Zephyr even had red eyes, wishing to grab Darren and beat him up. HMPH. After Zhang Guo pacified Tian Yushi's emotions, he suddenly remembered something and turned his head to the Navy soldiers on duty in the cabin and said coldly. Everything you heard here, keep it secret from me. Otherwise, I will never forgive you. This is an order, do you hear it? The Navy soldiers who originally looked like a bystander were shocked and nodded like pounding garlic. Especially you, Borsellino. Zhang Guo shouted in another direction. Borsellino raised his hands and grinned. I know. Please be grateful for everything. Chapter 127 I heard. Navy Headquarters, Marineford. Today's weather is really nice. Kaji walked out of the military academy, changed into a brand new military uniform, put on a brown round hat, lit a cigarette for himself, and walked towards the civilian area with his hands in his pockets. He was in a good mood today. Very good. It's not just because today is the military academy's day off, so he doesn't have to be beaten up by Kuzan, that hot-blooded bastard. Ahem, no, he doesn't have to train with that guy. But he finally cultivated the armament hockey. This is the first person in this training camp to successfully comprehend the armament hockey after Kuzan. Thinking of the envious eyes of Ghost Spider, Fire Mountain, and Stalaberry when he successfully displayed the armament hockey yesterday, Kaji felt a little proud, and felt that the sky was so blue and the clouds were so white. Well, although Kuzan comprehended the hockey several days earlier than him, what does it matter? That guy is a monster. There is no point in comparing yourself with a monster. Kaji, you are a genius indeed. Kaji smiled and blew out a smoke ring while walking. As he walked, his eyes suddenly lit up. Not far away, a tall figure was queuing in front of a breakfast shop full of fireworks. She had a high ponytail tied behind her head, the famous sword hanging on her waist was shining with golden light, and her eyes were cold. It was Gion. Kaji rolled his eyes, and suddenly put away the obscene smile on his face. He walked over with a pretended indifferent look and greeted her easily. Gion, good morning. Gion glanced at him and said lightly. Good morning. Kaji coughed lightly and called to the boss of the breakfast shop. Aunt Rocky. The aunt in the apron looked up and laughed heartily when she saw that it was Kaji. It's Kaji. You came quite early today. Don't you usually come later? Aunt Rocky was smiling. Kaji grew up under my eyes. As for his appearance, he is a little ugly, but he is not a bad person. After joining the Navy, he often takes care of this neighborhood. They are all family members, so they talk very familiarly. What's wrong? Your face is not swollen like a pig's head today. Did you finally win once? What's the name of that young man who made you grit your teeth? Cough cough cough. Kaji's face turned red with coughing, and he noticed that there was a hint of smile in Gion's eyes, and his face turned black. Oh, look at me, I'm talking too much. Aunt Rocky looked at Kaji, then looked at Gion beside him, couldn't help but smile, and changed the subject. What do you want to eat for breakfast today? I'll treat you. Steamed buns, oden, or ramen. Kaji's face suddenly showed a surprise. Aunt Rocky, how do you know I have mastered hockey? Aunt Rocky. She looked at Kaji, who kept winking at her with a puzzled look, scratched her head and said. What hockey? I'm asking you what you want to eat, and I'll make it for you. Kaji. He glanced at Gion, who seemed calm and indifferent, as if he didn't hear what he said, gritted his teeth, and said forcefully. That's it. Hockey. Only a truly strong person can master this ability. He raised his hand, clenched his fist, and shouted softly. Swish. A touch of black quickly stained his arm, wrapped around his fist, and showed a cold and hard feeling of metal. See, Aunt Rocky, this is hockey. As long as you master this, even bullets and swords can't break my defense. Kaji proudly raised his chest, and kept glancing at Gion from the corner of his eyes. This looks quite impressive. Aunt Rocky reached out and touched Kaji's arm covered with domineering, and asked with surprise. Now can you beat that young man? What's his name? Ku something Zan. Kaji. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he took a deep breath, and finally deflated a little bit, and said sullenly. Can't. Looking at Kaji's lost soul, Aunt Rocky comforted him. It's okay, you are already great, Kaji. After all, there are more geniuses in the military than one another. Just now, I heard them say that there seems to be a young man named Darren who did something earth-shattering in the New World. Darren. Darren is back. Kaji was stunned and looked over in the direction of Aunt Rocky's gaze. I saw a group of dusty Navy soldiers sitting inside, and they clearly looked like they had just returned from a mission. There were all kinds of snacks and beer bottles lying around on the table in front of them. At this moment, one of the soldiers, whose face was flushed with alcohol, suddenly lowered his voice and said gossipingly. Hey, I heard that Brigadier General Darren brought back a beautiful girl from outside. She has already moved into the military's family compound. As soon as these words fell, Gion, who had just received a bag of buns and was about to leave, stopped immediately and stood there silently, with his white ears slightly erected. Another soldier said. You don't know this, right? It is said that it was because of that beauty that Brigadier General Darren looked like he was drained of energy. I'm so envious. I saw it too. She is the most beautiful girl I have ever seen. What a pity. I heard that Brigadier General Darren is a philandering scum. Look at what you are talking about. A great man like Brigadier General Darren, can love be called philanthropy? This is called the more capable, the more work. That's right. This is called fraternity. Brigadier General Darren is really our role model. The pride of our generation. That's right. After all, Brigadier General Darren was able to escape from the base camp of the Beast's pirates. The man who came. Kaido of Beasts is such an idiot, ha 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 ha, he actually wanted to capture our navies. Monster, alive, this time he lost a lot. Escaped. But I heard that it was Commodore Darren who deliberately exposed the flaws for Kaido to catch, and took this opportunity to find out the location of the headquarters of the Beast's pirates. Huh, this seems to make sense. I said, how could a strong man like Commodore Darren be captured alive by a pirate? Even Kaido of Beasts can't do that. After all, there is already a legendary pirate who died at the hands of Commodore Darren, the World Destroyer, Bondi Valdo. Yes, I heard that Commodore Darren at the base camp of the Beast's pirates, he faced the siege of thousands of pirates alone, and even Kaido couldn't do anything to him. In the end, he killed the Beast's pirates alone. Commander Darren is so brave. I heard that he will be promoted to Major General soon. It's really amazing. And, it is said that after killing the Beast's pirates, Commodore Darren also fought with the Whitebeard pirates. What? Are you kidding? What a joke. The son of my uncle's sworn brother's uncle is serving under General Sengoku. He heard it with his own ears. It is said that the battle was so bloody that Whitebeard activated his world-destroying devil fruit ability and sank an island into the sea. Hiss. And then, what happened in the end? What else can it be? The Whitebeard pirates can't even touch the corner of Commodore Darren's clothes. Ha 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 ha. Quote. The Navy soldiers burst into laughter, and the whole breakfast shop was filled with a happy atmosphere. At the door of the breakfast shop, Cake was disheveled in the wind. There was only one thought that kept echoing in his mind. Beauty, fame, promotion. If I had known, I would have followed. Impossible, impossible. He suddenly came to his senses, gritted his teeth and turned to look at Guillaume. This can't be true. How could that bastard Darren kill the Beast's pirates alone, and also took the beauty home? Hey, Guillaume, where are you going? Plop. The hot buns fell to the ground. Guillaume didn't say anything. She drew out the peerless golden sword expressionlessly, and strode towards a certain direction with murderous intent. Kaji shuddered. Guillaume's face is so scary. He suddenly widened his eyes. Because he actually saw a stern blackness, gradually covering the golden long sword in Guillaume's hand. Kaji was stunned there. Thinking of his previous actions, the 10 exposed toes and wooden clogs gradually tightened. How can you repair it? He suddenly cursed and quickly followed. Guillaume, wait for me. Even if my eyes hurt, I will update more. I'll be grateful for everything. Daily, relax a little. Chapter 128 Guillaume's Heart. Walking along the streets of the civilian area of Marineford, Kaji followed Guillaume's footsteps tremblingly. Feeling the murderous intent emanating from the figure in front of him, and the crisp sound of high heels stepping on the ground very hard. He didn't dare to breathe, just lowered his head and put his hands in his pockets, muttering in a low voice. When did Guillaume realize the armed color domineering? It can't be earlier than me. No, now is not the time to think about this. He slapped himself. Concentrate. Kaji. Concentrate. Think about it carefully. How could Darren kill the Beast Pirates alone? That's something that even the Warring States generals can't do. Well, it must be fake. Yes, it must be a rumor. Fake news. Kaji forced himself to comfort himself and smiled dryly. As for fighting with the Whitebeard pirates, that's even more impossible. It's impossible that Darren was captured by Kaido for less than 10 days, and his strength suddenly soared to the level of being able to face the world's strongest man, head on. The Beast's pirates are not a special school. If they have that ability, why would our Navy headquarters set up an elite officer training camp? Well, it must be like this. And there is a rare beauty in the world. How is this possible? Kaji smiled dryly, a drop of cold sweat seeping out of his forehead. How could a real beauty like a scum and villain like Darren? Even if she wants to like him, she must like a gentle and considerate good man like my genius Kaji. That's right, it must be. Those soldiers must be bragging. As if he had found a floating duckweed in despair, Jaji's eyes shone again, and he clenched his fist secretly. The woman Darren brought back must be ugly. Number way. He gritted his teeth again. With Darren's character, how could the woman he targeted not be beautiful? Margaret, the charming and seductive wife of the governor of the kingdom of Yadis in the North Sea. Miss Safeni, the princess of the kingdom of Rost, who is full of youth. The captain of the Noor caravan with high boots and long legs. Maria, the nurse with big blonde waves and curvy body in the military hospital. Face after face with different temperaments but equally charming kept flashing in Jaji's mind, making him hate it so much that he almost bit his teeth. No, I don't believe it. Jaji suddenly roared with red eyes and clenched his hands into fists. I don't accept it. 2 lines of flames burned from his eyes, and both fists were covered with armed color domineering at the same time. He walked quickly to the side of Guillaume. The two rushed towards Darren's mansion with great momentum. The people around seemed to have sensed the rising anger of the two, and they avoided them and dared not get close. In less than 3 minutes, they stopped in front of a quiet courtyard. The low wall was covered with emerald green plants, and the branches of an oak tree could be vaguely seen sticking out of the courtyard. The small wooden door leading to it looked quaint. Let's just rush in, Guillaume. With the current explosive strength of the two of us, if we join forces, we can definitely beat up Darren, that bastard. Let him see the results of our training camp during this period. Kaji looked at the wooden door in front of him, and somehow he felt a little scared, and couldn't help but urge Ziyuan. Ziyuan didn't say anything. She looked at the courtyard in front of her with a frosty face, pursed her lips unconsciously, and trembled while holding the famous sword Jin Chen Shine Zhongsheng. Ziyuan, what's wrong with you? Kaji was stunned for a moment and turned to look at Guillaume. Because he found that the murderous aura on Guillaume seemed to have suddenly subsided a lot. Guillaume remained silent. She lowered her head and stared at the knife in her hand. Her eyes were dazed for a moment, and her face gradually filled with an indissoluble confusion and complexity. What happened to me? Why was I so angry? Isn't it normal that the shameless and vulgar scum brought a woman back? It's not the first day I met him. Besides, what does this have to do with me? He and I obviously have nothing to do with each other. We are not even friends. What qualifications and position do I have to lose my temper? At this moment, countless thoughts flashed through Guillaume's mind. With confused eyes, he stood there motionless. Guillaume. After calling out several times without any response, Kaji's mouth twitched, and his face suddenly wilted like an eggplant hit by frost. Damn it! He cursed in his heart, took a deep breath, mustered up his courage, walked forward, and knocked hard on the door. Please wait a moment. A gentle female voice responded. Kaji was stunned. This voice, so sweet, so gentle. Like a ghost in the valley, with a classical flavor. Kaji swore to the sky that if it was a conversation on Den Den Mushi, he could eat several bowls of rice just by this voice, even without seeing the appearance. At the same time, what Kaji didn't see was that Guillaume's face turned slightly pale the moment he heard this voice. Soon, the sound of wooden clogs slowly came. As the wooden door creaked open, a gentle and moving face came into the eyes of Kaji and Guillaume. In the morning sunshine, a light green-haired Amazuki Toki stood there in a kimono and wooden clogs, looking at the two guests with complicated expressions in front of her, tilted her head, and smiled sweetly. Excuse me, are you two? Time seemed to stop at this moment. A breeze blew past, blowing Amazuki Toki's green hair and the hem of her kimono. The fallen leaves in the courtyard behind her fluttered, forming a beautiful picture with great imagery. So beautiful. Kaji stared at the girl in front of him with his eyes wide open. His eyes turned into red hearts, his chin almost fell to the ground, and drool kept flowing from the corners of his mouth. Suddenly, he knelt on the ground with a thud, pounding his fists weakly, crying loudly. "Damn it! It's true. Darren, that bastard!" he cried heartbreakingly. Tien Yushi. And Gion on the side was also staring at Tien Yushi's gentle and lovely smile, not knowing what to say for a moment. She looked at Tien Yushi's hand, who was holding a freshly washed military uniform ready to be dried. In an instant, Gion felt her chest tighten suddenly, and her face turned pale. Has it developed to this point? In front of her was a gentle girl like a good wife and mother, and she. Gion glanced at the sharp and cold knife in her hand, and the blade reflected her murderous cold face, and a feeling of self-ashamed suddenly surged in her heart. That's right. The unspeakable bitterness gradually filled my heart and spread. Huh. Director Ziyuan let out a breath, put away the knife, and forced a smile on his face. Sorry to bother you, we are here to inform Brigadier General Darren to go back to the training camp for training. After saying this, she turned around suddenly, gritted her teeth and said to Jiaji who was crying beside her. Jiaji, we should go. Ah. Jiaji was still immersed in the grief that he couldn't control, and looked up in astonishment. Today, you will train with me. Ziyuan said coldly. Training. Jiaji was stunned, and then he seemed to remember something, and suddenly shuddered all over. No. Why am I always the one who gets hurt? He cried even louder. Please everything, thank you very much. Chapter 129 Shira Field. What a strange person. Looking at Gion's heroic back and Cake's figure following him in agony, Tianyushi couldn't help but murmur. She retracted her gaze, turned around and walked to the clothes drying rack, shook the clean military uniform, and then hung it up patiently. The white shirt and black trousers fluttered gently in the sunshine and breeze, and a satisfied smile appeared on Tianyushi's face. The doctor said that Mr. Darren still needs to rest well. He saved her life and promised to help her return to Wano country. Such a favor. Taking on some housework within her ability is the most insignificant thing she can do for him. Come on hard today, Tianyushi. Tianyushi clenched her fists with a flushed face to cheer herself up. Did someone knock on the door just now? At this time, a low voice with a faint smile came from the house. Tien Yushi said, turned around, bowed politely and said. Good morning, Mr. Darren, how did you come out? The doctor said that you should rest well. Her face flushed slightly, and she said a little embarrassedly. And why are you not wearing clothes? While speaking, she turned her head away, but she couldn't help but sneak a peek at Darren's explosive body. Mr. Darren is really handsome. And has a good figure. Although he is covered with hideous scars, he doesn't look scary at all. Tien Yushi thought to himself. Darren smiled helplessly. I wore long pants, but the weather was a little hot. In addition, I was used to training with my upper body naked, so I didn't think too much about it. He thought about it, took off a navy cloak from the coat rack on the wall, and put it on himself. Is this okay? This looming it looks even sexier, okay. Tien Yushi said shyly in her heart, but she gently said, on her face, and then answered Darren's question just now. Just now, 2 young naval officers came to see you, saying that they were from the officer training camp, reminding you to go back for training as soon as possible. But I don't know why, when they saw me open the door, their expressions were very strange. The man first stared at me with lustful eyes, then fell to his knees and cried loudly, saying something like, damn it. The woman's face didn't look good. Oh. Hearing Tien Yushi's words, Darren's face suddenly became strange. Can you roughly describe their appearance? Tien Yushi raised her slender white index finger, gently poked her dimple, and recalled. That male navy looked, well, how should I put it, a little sloppy. He felt a bit similar to the previous Major General Borsellino, but the sense of oppression was not so strong. She thought about it and added. By the way, he was wearing a brown hat. Ashi, I know who it is. Darren said with a twitch in his mouth. In fact, when Ashi said, lustful, and, crying loudly, he had roughly guessed that it was Kaji. Sure enough. Except for Borsellino, Kaji was the only one in the Navy who could be described as sloppy. What about the female Navy? Darren shook his head and asked again. For some reason, he always had a bad premonition. Could it be? Tien Yushi glanced at Darren, pursed his lips, and said slowly. That girl is very beautiful and good-looking. Although she looks cold, I can feel that she is actually very gentle and warm inside. Also, she has long black hair tied into a high ponytail, wears high heels, and has a golden long sword hanging around her waist. She is very tall. While speaking, Ashi stood on tiptoe and raised his hand, roughly gesturing at her height. Darren. It's over, it's Guillaume. He pinched his temple with a headache. So, is this considered a Shira field? To be honest, he has a good impression of Guillaume. Although there were a lot of troubles when she was in Beihai, it was due to Guillaume's personality and growth experience. After experiencing a series of things in Beihai, she also grew up a lot. Since Guillaume discovered the secret that he saved the father and daughter, Darren gradually realized that although her attitude towards him seemed to be very cold, the glances she cast at him from time to time in the training camp had already explained everything. It's just that Guillaume's self-esteem is too strong, and she can't tolerate any obvious changes on the surface. Darren doesn't care about this. The previous romantic deeds in the North Sea were just a show. It was consensual, no one was at a disadvantage, and Darren enjoyed it with peace of mind. But Guillaume is different. Well, how should I put it, Guillaume is a good girl. Of course, the most important point is, Darren will not admit that he is afraid that if he harms Guillaume, he will be beaten up by Sengoku, Zephyr, Garp, Suru staff officer and Marshal Steele. That, Mr. Darren, you know those two Navy men, right? Tien Yushi saw Darren's expression was uncertain and he didn't speak for a long time. He bit his lower lip with his pearly teeth and couldn't help asking. Oh, yes, they were my subordinates when we were in the North Sea before. Now they are my partners in the same training camp. Darren, who was having a headache, responded casually. The one who looks rather shabby is called Kaji. Although he is a bit lewd and has no moral integrity, he is a trustworthy guy. As for the tall female Navy, well, her name is Guillaume. She has a bad temper and sometimes doesn't speak well. Don't take it to heart. Darren suddenly felt a sinister murderous intent locking onto him. The pores on his back stood up and he subconsciously looked up. This look was terrible. Guillaume stood at the door with a cold expression, veins popping out on his forehead, holding a fruit basket in his hand, staring at him expressionlessly. Kaji was hiding in the corner, sticking out his dog head, looking like he was observing from the dark, and was giving him a lewd smile that said, you're dead. Darren. Didn't they leave? When did they start to come back? Damn it, I should have started magnetic field sensing earlier. But who would be ready in their own home? His expression froze there, and he laughed dryly. That, Guillaume. Although Guillaume and Kaji were not his opponents, if someone happened to hear him badmouthing someone behind his back, even Darren, who was as thick-skinned as him, couldn't stand it for a while. I forgot this just now. Guillaume suddenly pulled up the corner of his mouth and smiled, interrupting Darren's words. But this smile was extremely scary in Darren's eyes. She threw down the fresh fruit basket in her hand. I heard that you were seriously injured and exhausted. Take good care of yourself, Brigadier General Darren. After saying this, Guillaume turned around and left without hesitation. Kaji also made a face to Darren, grinned, and followed him. Darren. He opened his mouth, but couldn't say a word. I'm grateful for everything. All the big guys who have read the previous book or I know that I am not good at writing love lines. I also want to learn to write more heroines in this book. Maybe there are some places that are not written well, but I have to practice more, please forgive me. There will not be too many love lines, and they will be in the next chapter. Chapter 130 So sweet. The breeze blew up the fallen leaves. Guillaume's return caught Darren off guard. He looked at the fruit basket that fell to the ground. The various fresh fruits in it had broken through the beautiful plastic wrapping paper and scattered all over the ground, as sad as the heart of a young girl. I really deserve to die. Darren laughed at himself helplessly, and felt that his head hurt more. "Mr. Darren, are you okay?" Tien Yushi saw that Rhonda had an ugly expression on his face, pinching his temples. After a long silence, he finally couldn't help asking. "I'm fine, Ashi." Darren shook his head. Tianyu Toki was silent again, and suddenly walked to the door to pick up the scattered fruits, wiped the dust off them, put them back in the fruit basket, and then walked to Darren's side and asked curiously. "That girl named Guillaume seems to have a crush on you." Darren subconsciously wanted to nod and admit it, but he immediately came to his senses and slammed on the brakes. He raised his head and saw Kazuki Toki standing in front of him with a fruit basket in his hand, biting his lips and looking at him quietly. The slightly aggrieved look in his eyes and the slightly bulging face made Darren not know how to respond to this sentence at all. Darren. Damn it. Darren has never been so crazy in his life, and he feels bad all over. He thinks he is not a good person, and he doesn't care about the nickname of the biggest scum in the Navy. But there is a difference between scum and beast. Scum also has style. Ahem. Actually, the relationship between me and Guillaume is not what you think. Darren shamelessly tried to explain, but was choked back by Tien Yushi's words. So Mr. Darren doesn't like Miss Guillaume. Darren. He opened his mouth, but facing Tien Yushi's quiet and serious eyes, he couldn't say a word of denial. He doesn't like to deceive women. But Tien Yushi's next words made Darren stunned. Then you should pursue her. Tien Yushi smiled. The smile was beautiful and moving at the moment it bloomed, like an elegant white swan dancing on the water. What? Darren widened his eyes, as if he couldn't believe his ears. After spending these few days together, the relationship between Ashi and himself has made great progress and has long surpassed the scope of ordinary friends. Although there is no substantial breakthrough in intimacy, the two have a good understanding. Often, they can understand each other's thoughts with just a glance. Living together in the family compound, Tien Yushi is like a gentle and virtuous wife, taking on the responsibility of household chores, decorating this originally deserted home with a breath of life. The living room has many cute plush toys, the gray glass windows are covered with paper paintings, and the pots and pans are gradually complete. Darren is also happy to enjoy this, and sometimes he will do housework with Ashi. In addition, the two old men Zepha and Zhang Guo come over from time to time, watching their happy little life with an aunt's smile, and giving Darren a warning look from time to time. If you dare to disappoint Ashi, I will give you a good look. Unconsciously, Tien Yushi has already taken on the role of wife. It seems that she was born for this. But Ashi, if I go after Guillaume, won't you be unhappy? Darren actually stuttered a little. Even though he has always been romantic and unrestrained, he was a little confused for a moment when facing Tien Yushi's crazy idea. At this moment, it seemed as if countless formulas and theorems kept flashing in Darren's mind like pictures, and the CPU was running at full speed. What does she mean by this? Testing me? Or is she really not angry? But how can she not be angry? She is also a woman. Or does Ashi not like me at all, so he doesn't care? No, this is impossible. I still have some charm. Otherwise, I wouldn't be unable to sleep in Beihai. Not to mention the obvious acceleration of Ashi's heartbeat and slightly red ears when he looked at her closely. No. Tien Yushi's face showed a bright and peaceful smile. She tilted her head, her eyes innocent. Haven't you told me about these things before, Mr. Darren? I know your personality, Mr. Darren. Since I have chosen you, I must choose to accept all of you, whether good or bad. My father said that heroes are not particular about details. The strong should enjoy more privileges than the weak. This is the real fairness of the world. And a man like Mr. Darren who is bold and ambitious can be loved by multiple girls at the same time. It is the luck of those girls. Nani. Looking at the self-righteous expression on Tien Yushi's face, he was dumbfounded. Good guy, really good guy. So what Ashi meant was, he supports me to have more than one woman at the same time. She won't be angry, and she supports me to do this. This. There is such a good thing. Darren's brain crashed at this moment. After all, a scum is a scum, but he also has a bottom line. Even after so many years of traveling through time, he still more or less retains some of the moral standards before traveling through time. He is romantic, but that is a play that is consensual. You are happy and I am happy. But now the situation seems to be different. The people of Wano country really have different brain circuits. Forget about the dregs like Bushido, but Tien Yushi's is really an extremely good, fine tradition. Darren's eyes twitched for nearly a minute, and he managed to say something after a while. I can see that your father is a very wise man. Well, what he said makes a lot of sense. Darren himself couldn't believe it. Tien Yushi smiled sweetly. Yes, I also think that what father said is very right. She put down the fruit basket, walked into the house, took out a clean military uniform, and handed it to Darren with both hands. Mr. Darren, go out too. Aren't you going to the training camp today? By the way, apologize to Miss Guillaume. Darren put on his military uniform in a daze under Tien Yushi's service, and then walked out of the family compound. Come on. Remember to come back for dinner tonight, Mr. Darren. Tien Yushi stood at the door and waved goodbye to him with a smile. Darren waved stiffly, and his body subconsciously walked towards the direction of the training camp. He hasn't fully reacted yet. After watching the figure of the Commodore disappear at the end of the street, Tien Yushi put down her hand. She closed the wooden door, walked through the courtyard with falling leaves, and walked into the house with a fruit basket. After washing the fruits in the kitchen, she walked silently to the living room and took out a beautifully carved fruit plate. She knelt on the tatami and patiently placed the washed fruits on the fruit plate one by one. She seemed to be in a good mood. The innocent and sweet smile still hung on the corner of her mouth, and she was humming the soft and sad tune of her hometown. Her white arms supported her cheeks, and the hem of her pink kimono dragged on the spotless ground. With the newly bought Japanese screen next to her as the background, she looked like a peerless beauty in a ukiyo-e painting. The fruit is very fresh. Miss Guillaume is such a kind girl. I hope Mr. Darren won't make her sad. She praised to herself, picked up a pear, and took a bite. Rich juice bloomed between her lips and teeth. She smiled gently and generously. But her eyes were slightly red. So sweet. I asked for everything, thank you very much. Chapter 131, Can't do it at such a young age. Walking on the way to the training camp, Darren took a long time to recover. So, it seems that he has received the order to pick up girls. Is that what it means? Darren pondered over Ashi's words, and the smile on his mouth gradually twisted. A good wife at home. His mood suddenly became very good, and he couldn't help whistling. Although he hasn't had a substantial relationship with Ashi yet, can he let the duck that is cooked and put in his mouth run away? It's just a matter of time. A beauty like Ashi is by Darren's side, which is as attractive to Darren as putting cream in front of an orange cat. Don't expect the greedy fat orange cat not to lick it. Of course, Darren will never let Ashi down. But Darren soon realized something was wrong. Because he found that the people and patrolling Navy soldiers he met along the way all glanced at him with an extremely strange look. In that look, there was admiration, respect, curiosity and an indescribable pity. What happened? I just stayed at home for 2 or 3 days to recover from my injuries. Darren subconsciously pricked up his ears and tried to distinguish their whispers. That's Commodore Darren, right? He's so handsome. That's for sure, he killed the beast's pirates alone. Even the beast's Kaido, who is known as the strongest creature, was not his opponent and finally fled in disgrace. It is said that he almost wiped out the Whitebeard pirates. It really deserves to be the monster of our headquarters. Darren. The more he listened, the more he felt something was wrong, and black lines floated on his forehead. How did this version get spread like this? When did I become so awesome? I was captured alive by Kaido, but I deliberately exposed my weakness and endured humiliation just to find the base camp of the beast's pirates. I broke out of the prison alone and almost slaughtered thousands of beast's pirates. In the probing battle with the Whitebeard pirates, I was obviously at a disadvantage and had to retreat, but in the end the Whitebeard pirates were wiped out. This. Wait. He suddenly seemed to hear something, and his face changed slightly. They were a few gossiping aunts and uncles, sitting together, holding upside-down newspapers to cover up, but actually glancing at him out of the corner of their eyes. Such a tall and mighty young man. What a pity. I heard that his health is not very good. He was squeezed dry. It looks like that, look at his face getting uglier and uglier. Alas, young people nowadays are not good, unlike me, an old man. I am still so strong at the age of 50. Go away, your wife said you can't last a minute. But it's really a pity that you can't do it at such a young age. You look pretty straight. Unconsciously, Darren's face was as black as the bottom of a pot, the veins on his forehead were jumping, and the blood vessels seemed to burst at any time. Which bastard came from? Darren's teeth were creaking. When did I lose my strength? Damn it. Facing the various strange looks from the people, Darren subconsciously quickened his pace and began to jog, and finally even performed the Navy SIX-style shave. Arriving at the gate of the military training camp at the fastest speed possible, Darren let out a long breath, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and smiled bitterly. Who can I go to for justice? I can't go over and debate with those uncles and aunts, it will only make them more excited. I've suffered so much. Darren sighed, raised his foot through the gate of the training camp, and walked in. Run for me. Why did you, Huo Shaoshan, smoke a cigar during training? And you, Ghost Spider. You look at me with a stern face all day long, as if I owe you millions. What a wimp. When I was your age, I carried hundreds of kilograms of weight from the entrance of the Grand Line to the New World without blinking an eye. Listening to this familiar loud roar, Darren couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He really wanted to go over and ask, why didn't you use your eyes at that time? But thinking that he might be beaten by the black wrist, Darren decisively gave up the idea. Walking into the training ground, I saw Mr. Zephyr wearing sunglasses holding a heavy machine gun and firing, Don't doubt it, the pirates do have this thing. Zephyr's mechanical arm can fire bullets continuously. The technology tree is quite strange. The students who were carrying heavy loads and running around the school field breathlessly were chased by countless bullets. The scene was quite lively. Darren was not in a hurry. He just stood quietly in the distance, waiting for them to complete the training. 10 minutes later. The training was over. All the students were panting and supporting their knees, sweating profusely, their faces were slightly pale, and some of them even bent over and vomited on the spot. The training intensity of the training camp is not playing house. After all, Zephyr's nickname, Devil Chief Instructor, is not a joke. With his strong strength and rich theoretical experience, he can well evaluate the physical condition of the students and force them to constantly break through their limits. After all, people's physiques cannot be generalized. Not everyone can be like Darren, who can still tow a warship after completing the training arranged by Zephyr. Darren smiled, walked forward, raised his hand to salute and said loudly. The third-term student of the training camp, Commodore Rogers Darren of the Navy headquarters, has completed his mission and requests to return to the team. The voice immediately attracted everyone's attention. They looked at the figure on the edge of the school field with surprise. Darren, you're back. Huo Shaoshan's sweaty face showed a smile and waved. Ha 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 ha. Darren, you're finally back. I've become stronger again during this period. Let's spar again later. This is Kuzan, whose eyes are shining, and he jumped up directly from the spot. Welcome back. This is Stoloburi, Doberman, Dalmesia and others. The cold-tempered Ghost Spider nodded at Darren. In the training camp, Darren's popularity is quite good. He is strong, has leadership, is handsome, and speaks well. Especially, he is generous and often gives them all kinds of good wine and cigarettes to treat them to dinner. Who wouldn't welcome such a classmate? Oh, I almost forgot. Cake and Guillaume are not welcome. The former snorted in dissatisfaction. The latter stared at Darren coldly, and the murderous intent in his eyes could almost kill him. Regarding the debate about single female protagonist or multiple female protagonists, this book has multiple female protagonists. After all, the theme is there. But I will try my best to portray each female protagonist well and give everyone a happy ending as much as I can, which can be regarded as making up for the regret of the previous book. By the way, this one is a bit short, so I will try to write another chapter in the evening. Chapter 132. You killed him, right? Guyon's murderous expression made Darren smile bitterly. Now he finally understood why Guyon was so angry. The feeling was that he heard those rumors about being drained. Well, there are also my real comments price. It seems that everyone is living a fulfilling life. Darren smiled and waved his hand, and walked forward. From the time he took on the task of conquering Barrett to the time a series of events happened, and now, only 20 days have passed. But at this moment, in the perception of the biomagnetic field, the intensity of the biomagnetic field emitted by these classmates has increased by at least 30%. The intensity of the biomagnetic field represents the strength of the biological aura, which is the essential measurement standard and means all-round improvement. Although this exaggerated improvement speed is inseparable from the guidance of teacher Zephyr, it is ultimately due to talent and their personal efforts. It really deserves to be the golden generation of the Navy. Well, it's good to be back. Zephyr also put down the overly heavy machine gun at this time, looked up and down at Darren, and smiled with satisfaction. It seems that you have recovered well. Darren nodded and said, "Yes, Teacher Zephyr, I can now return to the training camp and accept the normal training arrangement." Zephyr waved his hand and said, "Don't worry about this, you can rest for a few more days." He immediately turned his eyes to other people. "Okay, today's physical training class ends here, and the next is free time. As usual, if you have any questions about practice, you can knock on the door of my office at any time. And Darren, you will go to the Warring States later and formally report the details of this mission. Well, then, get out of class dismissed." Zephyr raised his hand and saluted his disciples. All the students, including Darren, bowed deeply at the same time. "Thank you for your guidance, Mr. Zephyr." Zephyr smiled and turned to walk towards his office. "Ha ha ha ha, Darren, I heard about it." When Zephyr walked away, Kuzan couldn't wait to run over, put his arm around Darren's shoulders, and winked at him. Darren's mouth twitched. What did you hear? Could it be? A bad premonition surged in Darren's heart. It's okay for the people outside to gossip, but classmates in the training camp are another matter. Your record. I heard from Mr. Zephyr. He said that you escaped from the base camp of the beast pirates with your own strength. Kuzan's eyes glowed with blazing light, and he waved his fist in the air. And I heard that you destroyed the military factory industry that the beast's pirates had built with great difficulty. Is this true? He stared at Darren with burning eyes. So he heard this. Darren's heart was finally relieved. He breathed a sigh of relief, smiled and nodded. I guess so. In fact, it was just luck. It's so cool. Kuzan interrupted Darren excitedly, his face flushed. But the next second he suddenly hugged his head madly, grabbed his black curly hair, and roared with regret. I didn't get to carry out this exciting mission with you. Darren. For more novels 185,758 join. There will be a chance in the future. He broke free from Kuzan's hand calmly and patted Kuzan's shoulder to comfort him. Well, it's good that other students don't know. Otherwise, it would be too embarrassing. How is your injury recovery? Huo Shaoshan, who was biting a cigar, came over at this time, took out a cigar and handed it to Darren, gently hit the latter's shoulder with his fist, and said with a smile, Don't leave sequelae. Darren took the cigar, bit it in his mouth and lit it, took a puff happily, and said with a smile, Don't worry, what can't kill me will only make me stronger. Huo Shaoshan was stunned when he heard it. He carefully pondered Darren's words, and his eyes gradually brightened. What a philosophical sentence. He laughed heartily. That's good. Let you see my knife again another day. Darren smiled. I'm looking forward to it. Huo Shaoshan nodded. Then I'll go home and feed the cat first. Oh, by the way, he was about to turn around and leave, but suddenly stopped, looked at Darren again, and said in a low voice, that. When I was working in the South China Sea, I heard that there was a tribe over there, and there was a special secret medicine circulating in that tribe. It is said that it is very effective for that. What that? Darren was stunned. Huo Shaoshan's square face with a beard gradually turned red, and he stammered, that, ahem, you know. The one you need. That. Darren still didn't react, but when he saw Huo Shaoshan's eyes glanced at his crotch obscurely, he immediately frowned and his heart stopped. It's over, it's over. He also heard the rumor. I don't need it. I'm as strong as a monster. Darren gritted his teeth and said. Okay, don't get excited. Tell me what you need. Huo Shaoshan saw Darren's reaction and felt more confident. He looked like he understood. He patted Darren on the shoulder and walked away. Darren. Take good care of your injuries. Doberman also came over and patted Darren on the shoulder and whispered. Darren. It's okay. Maybe I'm just a little nervous because of too much fighting. Dalmisia patted Darren on the shoulder and comforted him. Darren. Stolobury. Take good care of yourself. Darren. Ghost Spider glanced at Darren. Just don't affect the fighting. Darren. The students lined up in tacit understanding and patted Darren on the shoulder, and started to comfort him earnestly. They all gave Darren a sympathetic look and left with a reluctant look. Darren was left alone, disheveled in the wind. He stood in the wind for a long time, then he gritted his teeth and yelled. What a sin! Huo Shaoshan, wait for me. Just after he walked out of the gate of the military training camp, Huo Shaoshan heard a shout. He stopped and looked at Jiaji who was walking stealthily. What's wrong? Jiaji glanced around and made sure that there was no one around, then he rubbed his hands and laughed. Is that secret medicine real? Huo Shaoshan nodded seriously. It's real, the nobles in the South China Sea bought it at a high price, and there is no market for it. If I wasn't 100% sure, I wouldn't recommend it to Darren. Jiaji's eyes lit up, and he smiled flatteringly. Well, I have a friend. Darren didn't know how he got to the Admiral's office. He knocked on the door in a daze. Come in. General Zhang Guo's low voice came from the office. Darren pushed the door open and said weakly to Zhang Guo who was sitting behind the desk. General Zhang Guo, you were looking for me. Yes. Zhang Guo glanced at him, his eyes suddenly became extremely stern, and the coldness in his tone made the air in the whole office seem to solidify. You killed Sild's Saint, right? Darren's pupils suddenly shrank into fine needles. Add more, ask for everything, thank you very much. Chapter 133 Pull and Game. The atmosphere in the general's office was extremely depressing. The temperature in the air seemed to drop sharply, and even the green plants in the corner held their breath. Zhang Guo's eyes behind the black-framed glasses flashed with unprecedented sharpness, and his eyes stared at the young navy in front of him like a hawk. A majestic aura permeated from his body and pressed directly against Darren. Darren's heart jumped suddenly, but his face remained calm and experienced. Found out. No, this is impossible. He believed in his own means and abilities. In the case of the killing of the celestial dragons in the North Sea, he handled it cleanly without leaving any traces. Subjectively speaking, no matter how you look at it, he has no motive to attack the celestial dragons, after all, his character is there. Objectively speaking, his alibi is completely sufficient, not to mention that all traces have been completely destroyed, and the Navy and even the world government cannot find anything. If there must be a factor of suspicion, it is his strength and devil fruit ability, which is very consistent with the profile of the murderer who killed the celestial dragons. But that's all. So Sengoku is cheating me. Countless thoughts flashed through Darren's mind in an instant. A perfect surprise appeared on his face, and he blinked blankly. Surd Saint. General Sengoku, I don't understand what you mean. Isn't the death of Surd Saint an accident? This is the result of your personal investigation. The Honorable World Noble Surd Saint was unfortunately attacked by a large sea king creature during his tour of the North Sea. The world government officials the ship was destroyed in an instant, and Surd Saint and many CP department guards on board died. The Navy headquarters and the world government expressed deep and heavy condolences. This is also the conclusion of the final case report. As for your doubts that I killed Surd Saint, Darren waved his hands hurriedly, his face horrified. How could I have the courage to attack the celestial dragons? After all, I am a law-abiding Navy. Zhang mouth twitched, and he almost couldn't hold his face. Yes, you are the most law-abiding in the Navy. Looking at Darren's natural performance, Zhang was also a little helpless. Regarding the attack on Surd Saint, he really couldn't find any clues at first, and even really thought it was an accidental attack by a Sea King. After all, when investigating the case in the North Sea, Zhang didn't find any suspects. Until the battle against the world destroyer, Bondi Waldo. In that battle, Darren showed a powerful fighting force far beyond his expectations, superb military command ability and the strong strength of the North Sea fleet he led. Most importantly, Darren, the North Sea Admiral, showed the ability to fly. It was from that day on, Zhang gradually realized something. Although it was just a slight suspicion, for the sake of safety, Zhang still secretly launched another investigation into the attack on the North Sea Celestial Dragons. But strangely, as the investigation deepened, Zhang really couldn't find any suspicion of Darren. But it was precisely because of this that Zhang became more and more suspicious that the person who did it was Darren. He didn't have any evidence, but he believed in his intuition. Darren, I won't beat around the bush. He cleared his throat and stared at Darren sternly. We are all very clear about the case analysis of the Celestial Dragon attack. Apart from the possibility of accidents, if there is indeed such a murderer, the attacker must meet the following three conditions. First, the attacker has strong strength and can sink the official ship before the CP members can react. Second, the attacker is very likely to have a grudge against Shield Saint. Third, the attacker is likely to have the ability to fly. At that time in the North Sea, those who met these conditions and had an intersection with Shield Saint. Zhang slowly exhaled. Only you, North Sea Admiral. Rogers Darren. The moment the voice came out, Zhang stared at Darren intently, trying to see any expression changes on the latter's face. But he failed. General Zhang, there are some things you can't say casually. Darren suddenly smiled and said helplessly. If you judge it according to your judgment, there are more than just me who are suspected. Who else could it be? Borsellino. Zhang. Facing the stubborn Darren, he felt a pain in his heart. Darren glanced at Zhang and was more certain that he had no evidence, and smiled. Since General Zhang wants to bring up the old things again, I can also confess something to you. What is it? Zhang frowned. Darren sighed and said slowly. When the CP0 members arrived in the North Sea, they announced that I would take over the investigation of the attack on Shield Saint. Do you remember? Zhang nodded. Of course I remember. The five elders took into account that I was a Navy admiral and busy with military affairs. In addition, the task of hunting down world destroyer Bondi Waldo was urgent. So they handed the investigation over to you. But is the truth of the matter really like this? Darren interrupted Zhang and said with a smile. General Zhang, with your wisdom, do you really think that the five elders, who are above the clouds, will care about whether your military affairs are busy? Or do they simply think you are not suitable for investigating the attack on the Celestial Dragons? How can? Zhang subconsciously opened his mouth to refute, but he was stunned as soon as he spoke. Darren's meaningful tone suddenly reminded him of something, and his face changed slightly. Indeed, I, a high-ranking admiral, was insignificant in the eyes of the five elders. Normally, once the Celestial Dragons were attacked, the admiral had to put down all the work on hand and make protecting and handling Celestial Dragon-related incidents the most important task. But before the investigation was over, the five elders sent a CP0 specialist to hand over the investigation to Darren. What does this mean? At that time, Sengoku was so eager to attack Bondi Waldo that he didn't pay attention to this problem at all. He just thought that he had saved a lot of trouble and was secretly happy in his heart. Could it be? Sengoku's eyes flickered and his face gradually became ugly. Darren, you mean, could it be that the world government doesn't trust me? I'll be grateful for everything. Chapter 134. The suspect is actually me. The initiative is back in my hands. Darren saw the changes in Sengoku's face and breathed a sigh of relief. In such a situation, if he answered whatever Zhang Guo asked, he would be passive and easily reveal some flaws. Darren didn't like being led by the nose by others. Only by diverting Zhang Guo's attention could he get out of trouble. In fact, from the beginning, Darren didn't expect that he could hide the attack on the celestial dragons from everyone. Especially after he exposed his devil fruit ability, he had already expected that there would be a conversation like today, it was just a matter of time. What Darren didn't expect was that this conversation came so suddenly. Now it seems that Zhang Guo is worthy of being the wise general in the Navy. He first let Zephyr give him a false signal to report the mission, so that he could relax his vigilance and not be prepared, and then kill him by surprise. It has to be admitted that when Zhang Guo opened his mouth just now, Darren was a little caught off guard in his heart, but he didn't show it on his face. If it weren't for his strong psychological quality, I'm afraid that others would have been exposed. However, from the nature of this conversation, it can be seen that Zhang Guo definitely did not have any evidence, and he didn't intend to pursue it, he just wanted to simply confirm it and hit himself at the same time. Otherwise, he would probably be surrounded now. Thinking like this, Darren's thoughts became clearer and clearer. A half-smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. General Zhang Guo, why do you think that the world government trusts you? Zhang Guo was stunned when he heard this, and subconsciously retorted. How could they not trust me? As an admiral of the Navy, I have perfectly executed the orders issued by the world government. Do you think the high and mighty master will really trust his watchdog from the bottom of his heart? Darren interrupted Zhang Guo coldly. He is going to bet now. Bet that the relationship between the Navy and the world government is by no means so indestructible. To treat smart people, you must use smart methods. Smart people like Zhang Guo are often suspicious by nature. Once suspicion grows, trust will be torn apart. Even if it was just a tiny crack, it was enough for Darren. Hearing this, Zhang Guo opened his mouth. Before he could say anything, Darren sneered. General Zhang Guo, let me tell you the truth. The order conveyed to me by the world government that day was not to continue to investigate the attack on the celestial dragons. It is that the 5 elders have begun to suspect. The attacker who killed the celestial dragon shield saint is a member of the Navy. Zhang Guo's face changed slightly. The 5 elders suspect you. Darren did not speak, but looked at Zhang Guo with a smile. Why are you looking at me? Now I suspect you. Zhang Guo suddenly froze. In an instant, countless thoughts popped up in his mind. If the 5 elders suspected that Darren was the one who did it, they would not let Darren secretly investigate members of the Navy. They asked Darren, the North Sea Admiral, to investigate, which first showed that the 5 elders believed that the latter had absolutely no suspicion of attacking Sild Saint. But if they didn't suspect Darren, who did they suspect? He seemed to have thought of something, and his face suddenly became extremely ugly. Zhang Guo's mind once again recalled the inference about the celestial dragon attackers. Strong strength plus intersection with celestial dragons plus possible flying ability plus being in the North Sea when the incident occurred. Isn't this the warship he led? The strength definitely meets the description. As a Navy admiral, he is very familiar with the sailing routes of the world government's official ships. Flying ability is actually not necessary, having a warship is enough. And at that time, he was indeed in the North Sea to carry out the mission of conquering Bondi Valdo. A series of thoughts made Zhang Guo suddenly confused. After analyzing it this way, the biggest suspect in killing the celestial dragons turned out to be me. The more Zhang Guo thought about it, the more he felt something was wrong. He actually met all the above conditions. Even in terms of knowing the route information of the world government's official ship, I am more qualified than Darren. After all, normally speaking, with Darren's identity as the North Sea Admiral at that time, it is absolutely impossible for him to know the specific route of the celestial dragon shield saint returning to the Holy Land. This is also the biggest reason why Sengoku wanted to test and could not directly determine that Darren was the attacker. At that time in the North Sea, the only one who knew the specific route of the world government's official ship returning was me, the Admiral of the Navy headquarters. No wonder the world government transferred me away from the investigation of this case. No wonder the CP0s looked at me with a bit of a strange look. Wait. Sengoku suddenly remembered the meaningful smile they gave him when he went to the Holy Land to report his mission to the 5 elders a few days ago. What does that mean? Are they warning me? Or are they suspecting something? At this moment, Zhang brain was running wildly at the highest speed in his life, and he began to look back, think, and delve into the details of every meeting and conversation with the 5 elders in the past. It's almost time. Darren saw Zhang confused, bewildered, thinking, entangled, and uneasy expression, and his mouth curled up slightly. When playing against a suspicious and smart person like Zhang, you must not use too many sweet words, which will only make him more suspicious of you. The key is to give some key information, and then let him think and fill in the blanks himself. The most important point is that the information given by Darren is true. The world government did issue an order for him to secretly investigate members of the Navy. Besides, it was impossible for Zhang to confront the 5 elders face to face. Are you doubting the Navy? No, you are doubting me. I'll really thank the wise Saint Damocles later. Darren laughed in his heart and sighed helplessly. General Zhang, do you understand how difficult my situation was? On one side was the pressure from the highest level of the world government, and on the other side were my most trusted and beloved colleagues, comrades, and superiors. The corners of Zhang's mouth twitched. What do you mean by emphasizing superiors? That, Darren. He hesitated for a moment and asked cautiously. You didn't say anything. Although Zhang knew that the death of the celestial dragons had absolutely nothing to do with him. But for the people in power like the 5 elders, is it important? Even whether the celestial dragons died or not is actually not important to them. The key is, the world government has become suspicious of him. This will most likely affect his future political prospects. I ask for everything, thank you. Chapter 135 I'm here to challenge the chief. Thinking of this, even Zhang, who has always been resourceful, calm and cautious, couldn't help but get a little nervous. As the most powerful violent law enforcement agency on this sea, the Navy has relatively independent military power, but in the final analysis, it is still a subordinate agency of the world government. Even if many people in the Navy sneer at the authority of the government in their hearts, they will still maintain obedience and respect on the surface. As a senior officer of the Navy and the only admiral in the current headquarters, if Zhang does not get the trust of the 5 elders, the highest authority of the world government, then his career is likely to come to an end. Apart from anything else, the position of admiral of the Navy that he was determined to obtain had to be approved by the highest authority of the world government. General Sengoku, do you think I am a person who betrayed my comrades, partners and superiors? Darren smiled and said with empty eyes. Sengoku. Why did you emphasize, superiors, again? I know my position very well. Darren smiled and said. The orders of the 5 elders are indeed important, but the unity within our Navy is more critical. That's why I emphasized your support and encouragement to me in the final investigation report submitted to the 5 elders. Zhang secretly breathed a sigh of relief, a smile appeared on his face, and he praised. Well, I am always very relieved when you do things. Darren nodded and said. What I must consider is that I must not let the world government lose trust in our Navy. This is something that none of us want to happen. He raised his head and looked at the powerful admiral in front of him, and said meaningfully. Are you right, Admiral Zhang? Zhang was slightly stunned when he heard this. He seemed to understand something. After a moment of silence, he let out a long breath and nodded. You're right. Darren smiled. Then, if there's nothing else, I'll go back first, General Zhang. The so-called reporting mission was just a cover. Zhang asked him to come here just to test something. Now that a consensus has been reached, Darren has no need to stay any longer. Ashi is still waiting for him to eat at home. Yeah. Zhang responded, and after a pause, a smile appeared on his face. Can Ashi adapt to the life in Marineford? Darren smiled and replied. I think she likes the life here very much. Zhang Guo nodded, and suddenly asked again. That's good, if I'm not wrong, she should be from Wano country, right? Yes. Darren did not deny it. The style of Wano country is still very different from other islands and countries in this sea. It is impossible for Tian Yuxi's true identity to be hidden from everyone. Zhang Guo pondered for a moment, and slowly said. Treat her well, and if possible, try to find out some information about Wano country. Okay, General Zhang Guo. Darren nodded. Then I'll go back first. After that, he raised his foot and walked out the door. Darren. Zhang Guo's low voice came from behind him, and Darren's footsteps subconsciously paused. I want to remind you that the goddess of luck can't always stand on your side. Darren smiled and didn't look back. I don't believe in luck, General Zhang Guo. After saying this, he pushed the door and walked out. Watching the heavy office door slowly close, Zhang Guo leaned back on the chair, closed his eyes, and gently massaged his temples. After a long silence, Zhang Guo suddenly chuckled. What a smart kid. He understood what Darren meant by that sentence. We must not let the world government lose trust in our navy. This sentence exploded fiercely in Zhang Guo's mind like a flash of lightning. We really can't continue to investigate. Zhang Guo sighed and clenched his fist secretly. The attack on the celestial dragons must not be related to any navy. When I walked out of Zhang Guo's office, it was almost dusk outside. Looking at the sparkling sunset on the sea surface of the distant naval port and feeling the sea breeze blowing in his face, Darren's tense nerves slowly relaxed. Darren let out a long breath, took out a pack of cigarettes from the pocket of his military pants, took out a cigarette and bit it in his mouth to light it. His thoughts flew with the smoke. Zhang Guo was not so easy to fool, but at least for now, he had stabilized him. He was a smart man. He should be able to understand the meaning of his words. The Navy could not afford the consequences of arousing suspicion from the world government. So even if Zhang Guo he really found any clues and evidence, he would never dare to tell the world government for the sake of the Navy as a whole. This is what Darren relies on. After all, Darren's current identity is very different. Former North Sea Admiral. Zeph's direct disciple. Fighting, World Destroyer, Bondi Waldo. Future Navy Admiral, the mainstay of justice. Destroyed the headquarters of the Beast Pirates. Reputation, military exploits, talents, gifts, strength. Darren now has everything. If the world government wants to move Darren, the implications behind this are huge. Darren killed the celestial dragons. Then will his teacher Zephyr investigate? Does the Navy Admiral Sengoku, who was in the North Sea at the time, need to be held responsible? Should the entire North Sea Navy be strictly investigated or even buried with them? In addition to Darren himself, do other members of the Navy also have hostility towards the world government and the world's noble celestial dragons? Once this kind of thing starts, it is no longer controllable. The world government might turn the entire Navy upside down. From now on, they will no longer have any trust in the Navy, and even cut military spending and disband the Navy's combat power. That's what Darren is betting on. He bets that Zhang Guo would not dare to take such a risk. A cigarette was quickly finished. Darren exhaled the last puff of white smoke, threw the cigarette butt on the ground, stepped on it with his military boots and twisted it, and extinguished the cigarette butt. It's time to go home. Looking at the sunset in the distance, he said to himself. But the moment he raised his foot, a tall figure suddenly blocked his way. Under the light of the setting sun, Guillaume, holding a long sword, panted slightly, the snow-white navy cloak behind him fluttered, and stared at Darren with cold eyes. Guillaume. Darren was stunned. He noticed that Guillaume had many bruises on her body and her face was tired. It was obvious that she had spent a day of heavy training. Why did she look for him? Rogers Darren of the 3rd Officer Training Camp of the Navy Headquarters. Guillaume took a deep breath, clenched the golden sword with both hands, and looked determined. I'm here to challenge your position as the chief. I'm grateful for everything. Chapter 136 You're not allowed to leave. Training camp, parade ground. Yellow sand fluttered in the afterglow of dusk. Are you sure you want to do this, Guillaume? Your physical condition is not very good now. Darren looked at Guillaume, who looked determined, and said helplessly. He could see her fatigue from Guillaume's face without even the perception of the biomagnetic field. Guillaume remained unmoved and said coldly. You haven't recovered to your best state, have you? Darren shook his head and said. I welcome you anytime if you want to challenge me. It doesn't have to be now. No, it has to be now. Guillaume glanced at the sunset glow in the distant sky, and the setting sun that was about to sink into the horizon, and gritted his teeth and said. Although this sounds very unreasonable, you also know that I have a bad temper, don't you? Darren. It's over, those two bad words will probably be remembered by her for the rest of her life. I didn't realize she was so vindictive before. Well, since you insist. Before Darren's voice fell completely, Guillaume had already drawn his sword suddenly, and his figure shot out from the original place like a gust of wind, attacking him. At least the famous sword Jin Chen Wei, which was at the level of the 21st craft of the big sword, emitted a dazzling brilliance, and the sword light flashed like lightning. The air suddenly burst into a sharp buzzing sound. The skill of Guillaume's sword was already quite good. Darren's eyes lit up. As expected of the future candidate for the Admiral of the Navy, Guillaume's knives' talent and level were praised by Admiral-level masters like Mr. Zephyr. The magnetic field perception opened instantly, and Darren turned sideways without any warning. Guillaume's sword passed by the tip of his hair and slashed heavily into the ground. Tear. The sword light suddenly shot out, and a sword mark of dozens of meters long suddenly lay across the ground of the training ground, rolling up the yellow sand. Seeing the power of this sword, Darren's eyes twitched. This girl seems to be really angry. The sword missed, and Guillaume decisively changed his moves. The moment his wrist turned, the dark-armed color domineering had quickly turned golden and dragged horizontally towards Darren's waist and abdomen. The swordsmanship is indeed very strong. This thought flashed through Darren's mind, and blue arcs danced on the fingers of his right hand. The invisible magnetic field spread out strangely, and Guillaume's face suddenly changed slightly, and he felt a strong dragging force covering his knife. The knife's momentum suddenly slowed down, and Darren took advantage of the situation and lightly retreated, avoiding it lightly. Why don't you attack? Do you look down on me? Guillaume bit his lower lip with his pearly teeth and swung his knife towards Darren again. The knife light poured down like a storm, like ink splashing, covering Darren's figure tightly. Darren sighed secretly, calmly took Guillaume's attacks one by one, and shook his head slightly in his heart. Although he had not practiced swordsmanship systematically, he had not eaten I have seen pigs run before, and I have faced Roger's mysterious, god avoidance, move. Not to mention that this time, he fought with famous strongmen such as Barrett, Quinn and Kaido, which allowed him to accumulate enough combat experience. It is no exaggeration to say that Darren has risen to an incredible level in both strength and vision compared to when he just left the North Sea. From his perspective, Guillaume's moves at this time seemed sharp and decisive, but they were full of a kind of venting force and lacked flexible and adaptable skills. Like a child waving a knife randomly, she was simply venting her inner anger. She wantonly squandered her remaining physical strength and the domineering power she had just mastered, without any intention of saving. Like a flood pouring down, throwing away all the emotions. Thinking of this, Darren calmed down and gave up dodging. Instead, he covered his hands with armed color domineering, and kept blocking Guillaume's attacks like a live target. Clang 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 clang. The sound of metal clashing and colliding continued to ring, and the bright sparks reflected Guillaume's slightly bloodshot eyes. 1 minute. 3 minutes. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. As time went by, Guillaume's movements became obviously slower, and the excessive release of domineering made her gradually begin to lose strength. Breathing became rapid, and her face gradually turned pale. Seeing this, Darren suddenly stretched out his big hand. Clang! A sharp explosion suddenly sounded. The famous sword Jin Chen Wei Wai Pei Ju Ji Nai Lu Gan Lang Lei Pu rubbed out a large piece of sparks. The training ground suddenly became quiet. Guillaume looked at the knife caught by Darren and tried to pull it out with force, but it didn't move at all. "Do you feel better now?" Darren said calmly while looking at Guillaume. This sentence seemed to be a signal, which made Guillaume stunned. The light in her eyes dimmed quickly, and the fatigue from excessive physical exhaustion surged into her heart. Her usually cold eyes turned red, and she was a little unstable. Darren let go of her hand, her eyes softened, and she whispered, "Go back and rest early." He glanced at the sky. The sunset had completely set at this time, and the night was about to fall. Only the last ray of afterglow in the distant sky was struggling to support. In the direction of the civilian area, wisps of smoke rose from every household. Noticing Darren's gaze, Guillaume bit her lip. "No, we haven't decided the winner yet." She held the handle of the knife in her hand and supported her heavy body to stand up again. Trembling, Darren was stunned and frowned. "You have reached your limit. I said it's not over yet. You can't leave," Guillaume said fiercely. Holding a knife in her hand, she rushed towards Darren with red eyes. But the moment she took a step, she stumbled due to exhaustion. Darren hurried forward to support her. Guillaume crashed heavily into his arms, her tied bun scattered, and her long black hair scattered like a waterfall. You let me go." Guillaume's face flashed a shy blush, but it disappeared quickly. She struggled in Darren's arms, trying to break free. "You can't even stand steadily," Darren said with some amusement. "I'll take you back first, and then go home by yourself. Don't worry, I won't take advantage of you." "No." Guillaume's lips turned pale, but he still shook his head. Darren frowned. But he suddenly noticed one thing. That is, since Guillaume came to him, she seemed to have been observing the weather. And her sword moves were not the decisive pursuit of instant kill in the past, but rather a feeling of delaying time and consuming the opponent's physical strength. Could it be? An absurd thought suddenly popped up in Darren's mind. Guillaume is deliberately delaying time and consuming my physical strength to prevent me from going home. The correct way to say it is, not letting me go home. To do something bad. It shouldn't be. Darren's mouth twitched, but he still cautiously tried to probe. "Guillaume, I'll confess one thing to you. Ahem. That is, I didn't have that kind of relationship with Ashy." As soon as the voice fell, Darren's expression froze. Because he actually found out. Guillaume in his arms stopped struggling. "Please be grateful for everything." Chapter 137 I've become a gentleman. It's really like this. So, is this Guillaume's Tsunere version of, "Don't be shy"? Darren's mouth twitched, and then he shook his head with a bit of amusement. Looking at the girl lying motionless in his arms, he couldn't help but feel a little overwhelmed for a moment. Against the white cloak, her long hair scattered on her shoulders looked even darker than ink. In her eyes like black agate, her eye circles were slightly red, revealing a kind of unwillingness and grievance. But her stubborn and proud character did not allow her to show the slightest weakness, and with her beautiful and refined girlish face, she looked charming in a different way. Perhaps it was the stereotype before crossing over, he had always been influenced by Guillaume's royal sister temperament and appearance in the original plot. But in fact, Guillaume at this time period was still a girl in her teens. It's normal for a girl of this age, coupled with her extraordinary background, to be a little willful and Tsunere. Are you feeling better now? Darren looking down at Guillaume, who was lying in his arms like a kitten, and had no willful look at all, he smiled mischievously. What does it have to do with me? Guillaume didn't dare to look at Darren's eyes and turned his head away. The tone was low, and the voice was as thin as a mosquito. Darren smiled, feeling the softness pressing on his chest. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart, and said gently on his face. Go back and rest early, okay? Your body has reached its limit. Guillaume bit his lower lip and whispered. No, it's none of your business. Darren shrugged and smiled. That won't work. If I get injured because of challenging me and have any sequelae. I guess General Sengoku, Chief of Staff Crane and Teacher Zephyr won't let me go. After saying this, Darren didn't give Guillaume any chance to refuse. As she exclaimed in a low voice, he put one hand around her waist and the other hand on her knees, and lifted Guillaume up horizontally. With the soft and fragrant jade in his arms, even Darren, who was experienced in combat, could not help but feel a little distracted. Due to years of practice, Guillaume's waist was very slender, almost a hand's length, and with the exaggerated size of her chest, it looked even more visually impactful. Her thighs were smooth and elastic, and her legs were straight and smooth, swaying in the air. From Darren's perspective, the toes on the pair of jade feet in high heels were clearly visible, and they looked crystal clear. "Duh, Darren, what do you want to do?" Guillaume exclaimed immediately, her eyes panicked. Such a shameful posture made her unable to maintain her surface of coldness, and she pushed Darren's shoulders hard with her cheeks flushed. "Don't move, or I'll really take advantage of you." Darren's words made her quiet down instantly, and she dared not move again. "Hold on." Darren held Guillaume horizontally, and his feet lightly touched the ground, and his figure jumped up. During the high-speed forward movement, Guillaume had to hold Darren's neck with both hands to maintain balance. Feeling that this damn scum was hugging her tighter and tighter, Guillaume's face became more and more embarrassed. Fortunately, it's night, he shouldn't be able to see, she murmured in her heart. In less than 5 minutes, Darren held Guillaume horizontally and came to her family compound. He hooked his fingers, and the door lock flew out with a click. Don't go in." Guillaume's face became anxious when he saw this. "This won't work." Darren looked at Guillaume's uneasy expression, and was immediately happy, and became more curious about Guillaume's home. Ignoring her objection, he pushed the door open and walked in. Unlike Darren's home, which was decorated elegantly and simply by Ashi, Guillaume's residence was decorated very warmly. Well, it could even be said to be a little cute. Fluffy rabbit dolls were placed everywhere, and the theme color of the room was tender pink. "I didn't expect that you, who looked cold, were so girly." When Darren saw this scene, he looked strange and couldn't help laughing. He looked at Guillaume teasingly and said in a pretentious way, "Miss Guillaume, you don't want the secret of your bedroom to be leaked, right?" Guillaume's face was almost red. You put me down quickly." Okay. It has to be admitted that the shy expression of Guillaume, who has always been cold, was very contrasting. Darren gently put her on the bed. After thinking for a while, he suddenly squatted down and stretched out his hand to grab her ankle. "What do you want to do?" Guillaume was shocked. Did this guy want to be a hooligan and take advantage of him? "I told you, I won't take advantage of you," Darren said unhappily, gently untied the laces of his high heels, and helped her take off her shoes. Looking at Darren's clear and serious eyes, and his unlucky movements, Guillaume's clenched fist gradually loosened. She didn't say anything, but bit her lips harder. "Okay." Darren smiled after appreciating and stood up slowly. "Well, it's a pleasure to spar with you today. I'm almost leaving." Guillaume raised his head and glanced at Darren, and immediately dodged his gaze after meeting his eyes. Then, as if he felt that he was too weak, he gritted his teeth and mustered up the courage to look at Darren. "Today, this kind of thing, is just because I am exhausted. Don't think you can take advantage of me in the future. Otherwise, I will never let you go." Darren raised his hands and said, Don't worry, I know. You hate scum and playboy like me. I understand." He walked forward and covered Guillaume with the quilt. "Have a good rest." After saying this, Darren walked out of the room quickly. After several seconds, Guillaume secretly poked his head out of the quilt. Looking through the glass window at the back of the gangster disappearing in the night of the yard, Guillaume was silent for a long time, and murmured in a low voice. Unexpectedly gentlemanly and gentle. The shyness of being hugged horizontally just now and the swaying on the broad chest appeared in his mind again. Jan didn't know what he was thinking of, he just felt that the places on his body that Darren touched were numb as if they were electrocuted. The face that had returned to normal turned slightly red again. "Wake up." Guillaume suddenly slapped his face hard and gritted his teeth. "That's the scum, and playboy you hate the most." Walking out of Guillaume's yard, Darren leaned against the wall and quietly lit a cigarette under the moonlight. The smoke surrounded his face, and his expression kept changing in a complex way. Until he finished the cigarette. He slapped himself hard and cursed. "Fuck. I'm a gentleman. He was full of regret. Well, some readers may not like this part of the plot. I have seen the comments. Don't worry, I will try my best to improve it and write better. Please thank you for everything. Chapter 138. It doesn't matter and it does matter. The night is seductive. The moonlight outside the window came in through the glass window, reflecting on the pink bunny doll beside the bed. After lying on the bed for half an hour, the faint blush on Guillaume's face gradually faded. She supported her exhausted body, sat up from the bed, and took off her navy cloak. After a day of high-intensity training, coupled with the duel with Darren, a lot of sweat made her skin feel a little greasy. She likes cleanliness and can't accept going to bed without taking a shower. Thinking of this, Guillaume remembered the scene of Darren holding her back just now, and the look in his eyes when he carefully looked at her toes when he helped her take off her shoes, and her face turned red. He shouldn't smell my sweat, right? All kinds of thoughts ran through her mind. Guillaume dragged her heavy body to the bathroom and turned on the hot water valve of the bathtub. Suddenly. Knock, knock, knock. The sudden knock on the door startled Guillaume. Is he back? She panicked immediately, and she didn't know what she was thinking. Her previous toughness disappeared without a trace, and she went back into bed like a little rabbit. Ahem. Guillaume, it's me. The voice of Suru's staff came from outside the door. Guillaume was stunned. Is it Sister Suru? Not that bastard. She breathed a sigh of relief, but suddenly felt a little disappointed in her heart. Thinking of her actions just now, her face flushed slightly. I'm here, Sister Suru. Guillaume took a deep breath, tried to calm down, and shouted to the outside of the door. Suru's staff pushed the door open and walked in. Looking at Guillaume, who was sitting on the bed with bruises on his hands and feet, a trace of heartache flashed in her eyes, and she shook her head and said, I came to see you. Guillaume was slightly stunned and smiled. I'm fine, Sister Suru. You just talk tough. Staff Officer Suru pointed at Guillaume, walked over with some helplessness and a little amusement, and sat down next to Guillaume. In the evening, I met Cake. The boy had a swollen face and a swollen nose. His upper body was covered with bandages and plaster. When he saw me, he knelt on the ground with a snap, crying and complaining. She pinched her temples. You're taking it out on him again, aren't you? Guillaume pursed his lips and whispered. He wasn't hurt at first. It was just that he wanted to take advantage of me and touched my butt during training, so I was ruthless. Staff Officer Crane. ... You hit me well. She was silent for a while, then slowly uttered this sentence. After a pause, Staff Officer Crane pondered and asked again. Then how did you get into trouble with Darren? Guillaume was startled. How did you know? Staff Officer Crane said unhappily. Your posture of holding a knife in front of the door of the Warring States office scared a lot of Navy. Guillaume blushed and dared not speak. When Staff Officer Crane saw her like this, he frowned and asked abruptly. Guillaume, tell me honestly, do you like Darren? How could I like him? Before Staff Officer Crane finished speaking, Guillaume reacted greatly and retorted angrily. He is lustful. His living habits are bad. He is frivolous, arrogant, and arrogant. Staff Officer Crane did not speak, but looked at the girl with scattered hair in front of him with a calm look. ... He is the biggest scum in the history of our Navy. I can't like him. Feeling Staff Officer Crane's eyes, Guillaume's voice gradually lowered. Staff Officer Crane saw her like this, and couldn't help but sigh deeply in his heart. With her experience, she naturally saw Guillaume's thoughts at a glance. It's good that you don't like it. Staff Officer Crane smiled and raised his hand to pat Guillaume's shoulder. Then it's nothing, I just came to see you. Now you look good, I feel relieved. She slowly stood up. Go to bed early, Guillaume, don't be so impulsive next time. Also. She pointed to the dusty military boots on the wooden floor and smiled. Next time, when the boy comes in, remember to ask him to change his shoes. Guillaume's face flushed. She opened her mouth, but Crane's staff waved his hand to interrupt her and said with a smile. It's okay, you've grown up, I understand. Although Darren is not a good person and has a bad personality, he is good in other aspects. And at your age, bad boys do have a lot of appeal. If you really like him, you have to work hard. I've seen the girl that the boy brought back from the New World. Although she is weak, she is actually calmer and stronger than you. Quote. I know you don't like him, I just said that. Seeing that Guillaume was getting angry again, Crane's staff added helplessly. Have a good rest. You can't like that bastard. Guillaume dove into the hot water, feeling mixed emotions. When did it start? Did his opinion of that guy change? Did he conquer Germa 66 alone? Did he help him out in front of the celestial dragons? If he really had to say, Guillaume felt that it was when he saw the father and daughter alive again. I'll do the job if I get paid. Darren's low, indifferent, domineering, and extremely confident voice echoed in her mind again. He protected the people he could not protect. It was at that moment that she realized how naive she was. She had wronged him. She remained indifferent on the surface, but in fact, from that day on, she secretly observed Darren. When training, she would stand behind him. Watching him practice so hard, even if she was exhausted, she would generate strength out of thin air and want to follow his footsteps. And in her heart, she would constantly recall the details of getting along with Darren, arguing with him, and even going against him in the North Sea. Then Guillaume realized it belatedly. To discover. It turned out that he had been accommodating herself. Silently and gently accommodating herself. So, her mind became confused from then on. She gradually became curious about Darren's past life experience, and even used the relationship between the Warring States General and Sister Crane to mobilize the files. Fighting step by step from the bottom. Struggle, scars, bloody battles, serious injuries, blood, fire. The more Guillaume pursued, the more he found that Darren's past life was so ups and downs. Behind the infinite scenery brought by the title of King of the North Sea, he carried all the heavy things. Political mediation, power struggle, life and death fight, money control. Darren used a kind of in his own way, he guards the North Sea and practices justice. When he thinks of Darren's difficult past life, Guillaume's already guilty heart feels even more bitter. What shocked Guillaume even more, and even made him admire, was that for a navy like Darren who came from the bottom and struggled to climb up, he should have been cautious and prudent. But he didn't. Even when facing the celestial dragons who control all the power in the world, he killed them. Yes, although there is no definite evidence, Guillaume just believes in his intuition. For his righteousness, Darren even ignored the celestial dragons. In the end, after returning to the headquarters, Guillaume suddenly found. In the past, her countless suitors, countless young talents from so-called wealthy families, were nothing compared to Darren, a scum. When a person has seen the brilliance of the sun, she can no longer be satisfied with the faint light of a candle. When a woman feels curiosity, pity, and admiration for a man, she will naturally have a good impression of him. So, after knowing that he had an accident in the New World, Guillaume was also very worried. Seeing Tianyushi in his home, she felt angry and ashamed at the same time. But thinking of Darren being injured, she still suppressed her anger and went to buy the freshest fruit and sent it back to him. But how can he say that to me? Guillaume was indignant. After holding her breath for a long time, she finally raised her head from the hot water, opened her mouth, and panted softly. She leaned against the wall of the bathtub, staring at the misty ceiling, in a daze. For a long time. Could it be? Is my temper really that bad? Quote. She covered her face with her hands and whispered softly. For more novels 45514 join. Guillaume's eyes suddenly became firm. It's okay, I came here first. Darren always thought he was a free man. When he was in Beihai, no, even when he moved to the headquarters, he would basically stay out until late before going back to the empty home. He is not homesick, and he doesn't have many friends he can confide in. He has been used to being alone for so many years. But at this moment, when Darren saw the lamp lit for him in the family compound in the middle of the night, and the figure sitting in front of the oil lamp waiting quietly. Even a cold man like him couldn't help but be moved. A room, a lamp, a woman, a table of cold food. Perhaps this is the meaning of home. Darren felt warm in his heart, walked into the house and apologized. "I'm sorry, I'm late. You should have eaten first, you must be hungry." Tien Yushi, wearing a pink slender kimono, slowly opened his eyes, looked at the dusty Darren, walked forward naturally, took the cloak he took off and hung it up, and smiled gently. "It's okay, I'm not hungry. And I want to wait for you too." Darren turned around and changed his shoes while saying, "I will come back earlier in the future." "Well, did you send her home safely?" Darren's movements froze. Tien Yushi smiled. "You have her scent on you, it smells good, it's the scent of roses, I wrote it down when she came over this morning." Darren's mouth twitched. He was just thinking of what to say to get away with it, when Tien Yushi's voice came from behind him. "I thought it would be, no problem, but in the end I found that it was still, related." "Ashi. Mr. Darren." Darren turned around. His pupils suddenly contracted, and his mind went blank. Boom. A ball of hot flame exploded in his brain. He saw a scenery that he would never forget in his life. The slender kimono slowly untied, slid down the white and smooth skin to the ground, revealing a slender and graceful body. Tien Yushi raised his hand to take off the hairpin and stood there, looking at the confused young navy. His face slightly blushed, but his eyes exuded a brave light, and said gently, "Become my husband. This chapter is not short. I ask for everything, thank you very much." Chapter 139 Unparalleled Beauty. Ashi, killing like crazy. So proactive. Darren's eyes suddenly widened. His brain went blank and crashed. He couldn't describe the scenery in words. The oil lamp in the house gave off a soft and charming light. The beautiful kimono beauty untied her belt, and her long light green hair was draped over her smooth and white shoulders. Except for a pair of white socks, there was nothing else. The blue-black eyes looked at Darren with a shy blush on her cheeks. Tien Yushi stood in front of the classical and elegant ukiyo-e screen, tiptoed gently, timid and active in front of her eyes, and her long eyelashes trembled slightly. The light green long hair fluttered gently with the night breeze, and the slender arms were slightly open to welcome, exuding a sad and gorgeous beauty. Even though Darren had seen countless people in his life, he was completely shocked by Tien Yushi's beauty at this moment. The anger that was provoked in Gion exploded directly in front of the delicate and white body of the kimono girl. Instinct instantly pierced his soul and reason. "You are still a man if you can't do this." When Darren came to his senses, his house was already in a mess. His military uniform was scattered on the ground, lying on the soft tatami, and the dim oil lamp next to him had been extinguished. The night was quiet and the moonlight was seductive. The stars in the night sky were arranged like a net, like pearls shining with stars, pouring down from the yard and resting on the girl who was sleeping in his arms. Darren exhaled slowly. Tien Yushi rested in his arms, his body seemed soft and boneless. After waking up, he smiled bitterly with some helplessness. He didn't expect that Ashi would be so proactive and actually opened his mouth close to his face. Who can resist this? The beauty of Tien Yushi is unique. There is a unique temperament of traditional Japanese women, classical, restrained, gentle, but there is an indescribable determination and madness in their bones. If you use a flower to describe it, as Ashi said, Gion is like a noble, delicate and cold rose, then Ashi herself is a sad cherry blossom. This is the character and temperament caused by the culture of Wano country. In that closed country, not only the samurai who believe in the spirit of Bushido, but even girls generally believe that the splendor of blooming in an instant are enough to overcome the regret of a short life. There is a poem that can be very appropriate to describe this culture. Live like the splendor of summer flowers, and die like the tranquility of autumn leaves. Translated into dance. This is the tradition of the Japanese culture in the real world, and Wano country is of the same lineage. But even Darren did not expect that the quiet Ashi would do such an out-of-line thing. It can only be said that jealousy kills people. No, I just comforted the jealous Guillaume, and then I went home and did this again. It's so cool. While thinking, Darren's mouth curled up slightly, and the hand holding the girl began to get a little restless again. A slender squeeze. Just right. Tian Yushi moaned unconsciously, twisting gently in Darren's arms, her nose wrinkled slightly, her eyelashes trembling on her closed eyes, and a blush appeared on her face. Darren laughed, and lowered his voice to Ah Shi's ear with a little taste. Don't pretend to sleep, Ah Shi. Tian Yushi then slowly opened her eyes with trembling eyelashes. In her blue-black eyes like agate, there was a hazy water smoke, and she gave Darren a look of shame and anger, and a lazy charm spontaneously flowed out between her eyebrows, elegant and mature. The immaturity and maturity of the girl are perfectly presented at this moment. The cold moonlight sprinkled on her face, making her eyes sparkle, adding a mysterious and unique temperament. This incomparable beauty caught Darren off guard. It rushed in his heart, making it difficult for him to control himself. In a trance, he felt that the girl in front of him seemed to become unreal, everything seemed like a dream, beautiful beyond words. Darren swallowed his saliva, and the fire in his heart was rekindled. How about, let's do it again? Ashi glanced at him unhappily, and this glance actually had the flavor of a young woman, which was extremely seductive. But the tone was still soft and weak. Not yet, not enough. Darren's eyes turned, as if he remembered something, and a malicious smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Is it okay to wear a kimono this time? Tian Yushi was stunned, and then seemed to understand something. Her face was instantly beautiful. The next day, Darren woke up from the bed. It's over. He felt it for a while, and was surprised to find that his whole body was a little stiff. Muscles were sore, and his legs were a little weak. It felt like being drained. Darren. Is it really weak? Darren's mouth twitched, and he subconsciously glanced at his physical data. After sensing it, he found that there was no change, so he breathed a sigh of relief. It should be that the effect of overdrawing domineering when trying to suppress Yan Mo has not been fully recovered, and coupled with last night's battle, isn't it a little tired? Looking down at Tian Yushi who was sleeping soundly on his chest, Darren couldn't help but think of the madness of, must omit 100,000 words, last night, and a smile that all men understand appeared at the corner of his mouth. Ashi officially became his woman. Does this mean, Momonosuke must die? Darren thought with interest, groping for the stubble growing on his chin. After lying in bed for a few minutes, Darren gently kissed Tian Yu Guang's clean forehead, carefully pulled out his arm and got up, but did not wake her up. Unlike his monster-like physique, Ashi's physical fitness is just that of an ordinary person. How can he withstand his conquest, and needs more rest? Putting on his military uniform, Darren went to the kitchen to simply cook some breakfast, leaving a portion for Ashi, and then he ate a boiled egg, leaning against the wall with sore waist and weak legs and went out. But as soon as the door opened, Darren was stunned. The whole person froze there. I saw Guillaume standing at the door, holding a hot breakfast in one hand and raising the other hand, preparing to knock on the door. The two looked at each other. Guillaume stared blankly at Darren's action of leaning against the wall and pressing his waist, and was stunned at first. Darren. He had a smile on his face that was uglier than crying. My husband, are you going out? At this time, Ashi's gentle voice came from behind. It's over. Darren was struck by lightning. His neck was extremely stiff, and he turned his head little by little. Ashi stood in front of the door of the house, wearing a white shirt casually, with a blush on his face. She glanced at Guillaume and smiled quietly. Miss Guillaume, good morning. Guillaume stood there without saying a word. Pa! The sound of breakfast falling to the ground sounded, and the soy milk spilled out. Darren suddenly felt creepy, and felt a terrifying murderous intent gradually emanating from Guillaume. Guillaume slowly turned his head and stared at Darren expressionlessly. A shadow covered her eyes. Husband. Darren's eyes twitched. Guillaume suddenly smiled. This smile was extremely scary to Darren. Congratulations, Brigadier General Darren. After the words fell, Guillaume turned and strode away. Turning her back to the man behind her, her eyes quickly turned red. Tears flowed down her cheeks, unable to stop falling. Darren. Looking at Guillaume's extremely sad back, he stretched out his hand but quickly took it back. After a moment of silence, Darren suddenly gritted his teeth. I really need to learn the observation and say dominance. I am so angry. Please give me everything, I am grateful. Chapter 140, Such a Strong Desire to Win. Seeing Guillaume's figure disappear at the end of the street, Darren could clearly see the crystal tears dripping from her chin, and he couldn't help but feel a little dejected. It's over. I finally coaxed her yesterday. Who would have thought that Guillaume, this arrogant and cold little girl, would be so enthusiastic and get up early in the morning to buy breakfast for herself. And even deliver it to her doorstep. Besides, even if she learned observation hockey, what would happen? Which good person would use observation hockey to perceive in his own home? Is he perverted? Looking down at the breakfast scattered on the ground, Darren sighed and picked it up casually. If it were someone else, with his lecherous personality, he would probably hug Guillaume shamelessly and say, "You came at the right time," with a thick face. But it's different now. Ashley just gave it to him, and no matter how ruthless Darren was, he couldn't flirt with girls in front of Ashley. He is a scum with style, not a scum without bottom line. You can love, but you can't hurt at will. Miss Guillaume seems to care about you. Ashley came over at this time and said softly. Darren shook his head and didn't take up the conversation. He smiled and looked at her, and said with concern. Why did you wake up so early? Can't you sleep a little longer? He paused. Does it still hurt? Thinking of the madness of last night, Tien Yushi blushed and whispered. There is still a little bit. She took Darren's hand, leaned her head on his shoulder, and whispered. I am very happy to be your wife. Immediately, she took the breakfast from Darren's hand naturally and pushed Darren, who was a little dazed. Catch up, Miss Guillaume is a good girl, don't let her down. Tien Yushi blinked mischievously. It really doesn't matter this time, because I became your wife first. Under Darren's somewhat stunned eyes, she smiled with curved eyebrows, like a kitten stealing fish. I won, hee hee. After developing the biomagnetic field, Darren quickly found Guillaume. In Guillaume's family compound. Standing on the roof of a house in the distance, Darren looked at the figure curled up against the wall and sobbing softly. He hesitated for a moment and did not walk over immediately. In front of the house. Guillaume hugged his knees with both hands, his eyes were red, and his shoulders were shaking constantly. Bean-sized tears could not stop flowing from his eyes, and then slid down his fair face. Like a wounded little rabbit, hiding in the corner and silently licking his wounds. Asshole. Asshole. Darren is a big asshole. She sobbed and cursed in a low voice, kicking the pebbles beside her with her feet, and her beautiful eyes were soon red and swollen from crying. Guillaume didn't know what made her even more angry and sad. Did Darren lie to her? Is it the embarrassment when he saw her? Or was it the smile of a winner that she hid deeply when she looked at her? Despicable, shameless, vulgar and lustful bastard. Guillaume cursed in a low voice in grief and anger. If you curse me again, I won't be polite. A helpless voice suddenly came, which made Guillaume panic. She looked up in surprise and saw the tall figure jumping down from the wall, and her eyes became redder and redder. What are you doing here? You bastard! Get out of here! I don't want to see you. She couldn't control herself anymore when she spoke of her grievance, her voice was full of tears. Darren sighed. I was thinking that you hadn't had breakfast yet, so you must be hungry. Eat breakfast first and then scold me, so that you will have the strength. If you really can't, I'll let you beat me up, okay? He raised the bag of breakfast in his hand and smiled. Guillaume stared blankly at the breakfast that Darren had just bought, and thought of the stupid thing he had just done. His nose was sore, his eyes were full of tears, and he cried aggrievedly. Don't you care? Don't you already have her? You are a liar. A super liar. Yesterday you told me that nothing happened between you. But today, she has put on your shirt. Obviously I was here first. Woo 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 woo. Tears fell to the ground like pearls with broken strings. Darren's mouth twitched. It was true that nothing had happened yesterday. But I didn't expect Ashi to open his ultimate in a close fight. It should have been a long-term tug of war of jealousy. Who could have thought that Ashi would steal the home and directly kill the game? Can I blame me for this? If I could still bear it in that situation, could I still be a scum? But Darren certainly didn't dare to say this. Otherwise, he would probably be nerfed. So he smiled and said, "Don't be angry, come and have some breakfast first." "No, I won't eat your food." Dion wiped her tears, stared at Darren stubbornly, and gritted her teeth. This girl is too stubborn, it seems that I have to use force. Darren had such a thought in his mind. He put down his breakfast and approached Dion step by step. "You, don't come over." Dion watched Darren approach her and subconsciously stood up, trying to dodge. She wanted to retreat, but her back soon hit the wall. Seeing the Commodore getting closer and closer, Dion's heart suddenly panicked. What does he want to do? She noticed that his eyes looking at her were a little hot. He is a scum. Dion reminded herself silently in her heart. Darren finally walked in front of Dion, stared into her eyes, and suddenly said, "Do you like me, Dion? You are too close to me." The breath full of male hormones came to her face, and Dion forgot the grievance for a while, turned her head away, and did not dare to look at Darren. She smelled his breath, which was a masculine, unruly and domineering smell. He is a scum. Am I really in love with a scum? The eyes began to dodge. "Do you like me?" Darren asked again. Who likes you? Don't be shameless." Click. Darren's left hand suddenly grabbed Dion's hands, then pulled them over his head and pressed them against the wall. Dion wanted to struggle, but found that she could not resist Darren's strength at all. But the next second, she was stunned. Darren's right hand suddenly touched her face, and his hot fingertips lifted her chin, making her look into his eyes. Dion felt her whole body stiffen. The body seemed to be electrocuted, paralyzed and unable to move. What did he want to do? Then Dion saw a pair of gentle eyes. Domineering, unruly, cold, but permeated with gentle eyes. "Dion, this is the last time I ask you this question." In the confused and blurred mind, a man's voice came. "Do you like me? If you say no, I will turn around and leave immediately and never contact you again. After graduating from the training camp, I will apply for transfer to the new world, and then you won't have to see me, a disgusting scum, anymore." Dion was stunned. His face suddenly turned pale. I. Her lips trembled slightly, but she couldn't say, "I don't like you, anyway." Then, woo. She felt her lips were blocked. When Dion hesitated, Darren, who understood her feelings, no longer hesitated. He kissed her lips forcefully and quickly, pried open her lips and teeth, and kissed her deeply. Hot and lingering. Dion's mind was blank. Her still red eyes widened instantly, and her pupils contracted tightly. She subconsciously wanted to resist, but Darren was unyielding. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Dion felt his body tingling, as if he had lost his strength. The focus of his pupils became blurred, and he closed his eyes. He even forgot to resist and kissed back reflexively. Unconsciously. Darren let go of the hand that was holding Dion. Dion also hugged his neck, gradually becoming confused and infatuated. Until a certain moment. Hiss. Darren suddenly felt pain and was pushed away by Dion. Blood oozed from his lips. Dion opened his blurry eyes, panting, trembling, and numb legs and feet. "So you still like me?" Darren smiled a little embarrassedly. Dion said angrily. "Shut up. If you don't push me away, I won't have time to talk." "No, shut up." Dion suddenly rushed out like a female leopard, grabbed Darren with both hands, turned around and knocked him into the house. It was still the big bed full of girlish style and pink bunny dolls, and Darren was thrown on it with a bang. Before he could react, Dion sat on him directly, holding him tightly with her slender and powerful legs, staring at him fiercely with tearful eyes. "How many times did you do it?" Ah. Darren was a little confused, looking at the murderous Guillaume, and subconsciously said, 3 times. Guillaume's eyes flashed with a competitive light, and he pulled Darren's belt open. Guillaume, don't be impulsive, I haven't recovered yet. Looking at Guillaume's gnashing teeth, resolute and tenacious expression, Darren immediately panicked. Darren, Sue degree, Sue. This is. The desire to win is aroused. My back and waist are already sore, if they really compete. But the next second. Darren, see, hollow circle. Backquote no. Don't shiver. This chapter is not short, I beg for everything, thank you. Chapter 141 7 times. 2 hours later. The door was suddenly pushed open. With one hand on the door frame, Darren staggered out with a pale face, holding the wall. After leaving the family compound almost as if running away, Darren found a stone pier to sit down and silently took out a cigarette. After biting the cigarette in his mouth and lighting it, he took a few puffs and recovered. Crazy. Really crazy. A woman obsessed with winning is so scary. 4 times. This is when the little girl Guillaume endured the pain. And with the weak Tianyu different, Guillaume, who has been training for many years, has great physical strength, and a pair of long legs that are round and powerful, quite powerful. That is a leg skill that even Lan Zhao can kick. Although the scenery below looks very white and big, no, very beautiful, it can't stand it. Feeling his body that was so weak that his legs were shaking, and his lower back was sore, Darren couldn't help but have an expression of wanting to cry but not tears. 7 times. Darren's mouth twitched, and suddenly threw the cigarette butt on the ground fiercely. What do I need this monster-like physique for? He shook his head and sighed. He stood up slowly, identified the direction, and walked towards a restaurant. Well, I have to replenish my nutrition. Holding his lower back all the way, facing the strange and pitying eyes of many people, Darren, who had long been numb to this, walked slowly into the restaurant. Darren. As soon as Darren entered the door, he saw Kuzan with a look of surprise on his face, waving to him enthusiastically. What a coincidence. Sit over here, I just ordered the dishes, let's eat together. Darren was slightly stunned, but he didn't say anything and sat down directly. Why are you here? He asked casually, waved to the boss, and asked for a bottle of wine. Kuzan said dissatisfiedly. I live in this neighborhood, okay. You are my opponent, but you don't even know this. Darren rolled his eyes unhappily. He took the wine from the boss, poured a glass for Kuzan, and then poured a glass for himself, and drank it down. Kuzan looked at Darren with a sad face and asked curiously. Why are you unhappy? You just went out to sea to carry out a mission. And fought against strong men like Kaido and Whitebeard. His eyes lit up. Now your glorious deeds are spreading all over Marineford. Darren's mouth twitched. Yes, now my glorious deeds were all over Marineford. While talking, the waiter brought up dishes. Fat and lean roasted wild boar meat, fragrant strawberry pie, a large plate of vegetable salad, 2 bowls of hell ramen, all kinds of seafood sashimi. I didn't care about Kuzan, the chatterbox and passionate young man, and Darren, who was already hungry, started to deal with the food in front of him and gobbled it up. What an amazing eating speed. Kuzan looked at Darren in surprise, murmured in a low voice, and then seemed to think of something, and a fiery flame erupted in his eyes. Is this the secret of your strength? Darren. Before Darren could speak, Kuzan was eager to fight. I've decided. This is a duel. After the voice fell, Kuzan was not willing to lag behind and stuffed food into his mouth frantically. The two had red eyes, like 2 starving ghosts, sweeping away the food on the table like a whirlwind. They even asked the boss to add more dishes from time to time. Guests at other tables in the restaurant gradually discovered the amazing scene here, and looked at the empty plates piled up like a mountain in front of them with shock. This is too exaggerated. The waiter can't serve the dishes in time. How many days have these 2 guys not eaten? After half an hour. The 2 people who were full of wine and food put down their knives and forks comfortably, leaned back, and leaned lazily on the back of the chair, with their stomachs bulging into exaggerated balls. So full. Kuzan burped, and then looked at Darren with interest. You are worthy of being the rival of life I have identified, and I still lost to you in the end. A few black lines floated on Darren's forehead. I'm just hungry. I never thought of fighting you. But he also knew that he couldn't reason with this passionate young man, so he shook his head and changed the subject. How do you feel after coming to the headquarters? Are you used to it? Kuzan scratched his head and said. There's nothing to get used to, it feels the same. Anyway, now in the training camp, it's training, eating, resting, and it's a cycle every day. I'm in a daze when I return to my residence. But you, I heard you're dating. Don't neglect your training because of love. He sighed. Yes, it seems that he's dating more than one person now. Darren secretly complained. But Kuzan's words reminded him. With Ashi's intelligence, he can definitely see some clues. If he goes home tonight and Ashi's desire to win gets too much, then he'll be in trouble. Even an Iron Man can't stand it. Ashi's personality looks quiet and gentle, but his competitive spirit is not weak at all. Or, run away and hide from the limelight first. The most important thing is that Darren now has enough strength to try to find some treasures that only time travelers know. He has always been obsessed with something. If he can get that thing, although he doesn't need it, it will definitely be a great help to develop his power. After making up his mind, Darren did it. Kuzan, please ask Teacher Zephyr for take a day off, and help me send a message to my family. And Guillaume. Kuzan asked in confusion, ask for leave. His eyes lit up, and he stared at Darren excitedly. You are going out to sea again. Who are you going to find this time? You have fought against Whitebeard and Kaido, are you going to find Big Mom? Or Golden Lion? Darren, why don't you take me with you? I am already very strong, and I will never hold you back. He showed off his biceps. We will definitely become the strongest combination of the Navy if we join forces. Darren shook his head and said unhappily, you think too much, I just want to go back to the North Sea. After all, that is my hometown. I haven't been back for so long, and I miss it a little. Kuzan's personality is not suitable for keeping secrets, so he can't take him with him on this trip, lest there be any unforeseen troubles. Okay. Kuzan lost interest when he heard that Darren was going back to the North Sea. He was born in the South Sea and knew the weakness of the four seas very well. What he longed for was a stronger opponent, and the dangerous and endless new world. Well, thank you for your help. Darren patted his shoulder and walked out of the restaurant. Standing on the street. He seemed to remember something, waved in a certain direction, and a weak arc of electricity jumped between his fingers. 3 seconds later. A pitch-black long sword broke through the air, suddenly came in front of Darren, and hovered steadily in the air. 21 skills of the big sword, the demon sword, Yanmo. Looking at Yanmo, who became much more docile, Darren smiled with satisfaction. A metal skateboard quickly formed under his feet. He stepped on the skateboard and flew up at an astonishing speed under the push of the magnetic field, and soon disappeared in the distant sky. So handsome. Kuzan looked at Darren's back with a longing face, and murmured with shining eyes. Please pay the bill. At this time, the boss suddenly walked behind him and said with a smile. A total of 916,000 Baileys. Kuzan. He took out his wallet tremblingly, wanting to cry but not having tears. Add more chapters, asking for everything. The plot speeds up again. Chapter 142 People's Dreams. Gaia Island, Magic Valley Town. Hey, there seems to be something in the sky. Ha 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 ha, is it a bird? No, it's not a bird. So fast. It's a person. Ha 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 ha, how could there be someone in the sky? Oldwool, I told you not to patronize Lair all the time. Although that woman's ass is really powerful, you are starting to get dazzled. Boom. A silver light suddenly sank into the ground at an astonishing speed, and the violent air waves raised huge dust. The pirates who were teasing each other were stunned and stood there, their whole bodies covered by dust, leaving only a pair of eyes exposed, blinking. The next second. Damn it. Who is it? You are looking for death. I am one-armed Vic. A pirate with a bounty of 25 million. You are dead." They shook off all the dust on their bodies, stared at the looming figure in the flying dust with murderous intent, and the sound of various weapons being drawn rang out. Drawing swords at each other when there is a disagreement, this is the principle of pirates. "Oh, it's a pirate. Do you want to cause trouble for me? I just happen to be in a bad mood." A deep voice came out slowly, and then a tall shadow enveloped the pirates. "Navy. It's still a brigadier general of the headquarters. What an exaggerated body." The pirates looked up in astonishment, looking at the black-haired Navy who was 3 meters tall in front of them. Their faces suddenly turned pale, and they swallowed subconsciously. The latter stared at them expressionlessly, as if looking at a group of dead people. Although the Navy's face did not look good, his eye sockets were slightly sunken, and he looked a little malnourished, and he covered his eyes from time to time when he walked. The lower back was quite depressed. But the suffocating feeling of oppression was really hitting the fragile hearts of these pirates. "See, Navy Lord." The pirate with a broken arm and a dreadlock laughed. "I was impulsive just now, very sorry." He couldn't finish his words. A flash of black light suddenly flashed by. A faint trace of blood first oozed from his neck, and then his head shot up to the sky. Blood spurted out from the broken neck like a fountain, splashing on the pale face of his companion next to him. After a second of dead silence, hiss! A gasp came from the crowd of onlookers. They looked at the headless body that slowly knelt on the ground with disbelief, and the horror in their hearts was beyond description. What happened? They couldn't see the movements of the Commodore at all. The big pirate, one-armed Vic, with a bounty of 25 million Baileys, his head was cut off just like that. Then everyone saw a black knife. The blade was slender, with purple flame-like patterns imprinted on it, quietly hovering beside the Navy. Blood was slowly gathering from the blade, but it did not gather on the tip of the blade and drip, but was constantly absorbed by the blade. In the end, no trace was left. Demon sword. Some sharp-eyed people noticed seeing the strangeness of this knife, he said with a trembling voice. Plop! Plop! The remaining pirates suddenly put down their weapons, fell to their knees with a plop, and said in horror. "Marine, we are wrong. We swear that from today on, we will never be pirates again. We know we did something wrong, please let us go." The black-haired Navy looked at them indifferently and shook his head. "No, you don't know you are wrong. You just know you are going to die." The pirates were stunned. A touch of cruelty flashed in the depths of their eyes, and the hands that had never let go of the weapons suddenly clenched, and suddenly jumped up and pounced towards the Navy. Swish! The black light flashed again. Like the phantom of the god of death, it passed through the pirate crowd at an unimaginable speed. The pirates paused. Swish! Countless sword marks exploded on their bodies, and blood spurted out. Under the shocked and speechless eyes of the crowd, this evil pirate group all lost their lives. Yanmo flew back again, trembling slightly and making a joyful cry, as if expecting the praise of the young Navy man. Darren lit a cigarette and said unhappily, "I'm not in a good condition now, don't think I'll touch you." What a joke. I was already very weak. If I was squeezed by Yanmo again, I probably wouldn't even have the strength to stand up. So, this is the Magic Valley town on Gaia Island, right? Darren blew out a smoke ring from his mouth, took out a record pointer from his arms, identified it, and confirmed it with the person next to him. The people around, well, of course there were also many pirates. Hearing this question from the god of death, they nodded like crazy. That's right. Darren smiled with satisfaction. The record pointer was obtained from the headquarters. The headquarters of the Navy has the largest and most detailed sea charts and island pointers in this sea. Although this thing is confidential and generally needs to be approved before it can be used, this is not difficult for Darren. The prominent reputation plus the rank of general plus the tip of 500,000 Baileys. The staff of the intelligence department handed the pointer to him in person with gratitude. He even bowed with tears of gratitude, and expressed his worship of Brigadier General Darren in a moving voice. "Let's eat something first. It seems that I didn't eat enough before." Darren muttered. He didn't take the little episode just now to heart. Gaia Island is located in the first half of the Grand Line and belongs to the no man's land, illegal zone. This place does not belong to the sphere of influence of any member country of the world government, and there are no naval bases around it, so this island has become a base for many pirates to occupy, buy and sell materials, and transit. This kind of island exists everywhere in every sea area. There used to be many in the North Sea, but after Darren's purge and bloodbath, they are basically extinct. Although there are still pirates on those islands from time to time, as long as they don't make trouble and pay taxes like everyone else, the North Sea Navy will not care too much. After all, pirates are endless. Just now, I took action purely to test my new trick of magnetic sword control. Of course, the Navy doesn't need a reason to kill pirates. As for Darren's purpose of coming to Gaia Island this time, the answer is already obvious. Sky Island, Golden Town, and the devil fruit known as Invincible. Natural thunder fruit. But before setting off to Sky Island, he has to fill his stomach first. Flying here non-stop with the power of the magnetic fruit consumed a lot of his physical strength. I heard that the cherry pie here tastes very good. This thought popped up in Darren's mind. He remembered the famous scene in the original plot, subconsciously raised his head, looked at the high blue sky, and smiled. People's dreams will never end. There is nothing wrong with this sentence. But I can intercept your dreams in advance. I ask for everything, thank you very much. Chapter 143 Return to the North Sea. Boss, a glass of beer, a cherry pie. Darren walked into a tavern, found a seat and sat down, and shouted to the boss behind the bar. The light in the tavern was not bright, and many guys with blood on their bodies were eating meat, but when they saw Darren, they immediately quieted down. Some timid ones changed their faces slightly and slipped out carefully. The arrival of the Commodore made the atmosphere of the tavern weird. The strength of the first half of the Grand Line was limited, and the pirates who could run from the four seas to Gaia Island basically had some brains. A Commodore from the Navy headquarters may not be a big deal in the New World, but he can basically walk sideways in the first half of paradise. Hey, am I right? Yes, it should be him. Unusual height, and that look. It's the Navy who killed World Destroyer, Bondi Waldo. King of the North Sea, Rogers Darren. Damn, how did such a big shot come to Mogu Town? Will we all be killed by him? Waves of whispers continued to sound, and the drinkers in the tavern looked at Darren with awe and fear. Ignoring the gazes of these people, Darren picked up the foaming beer, took a gulp, and took a bite of the freshly baked cherry pie in front of him. Well, it's not particularly delicious, but at least it's not bad. While replenishing energy, Darren began to think. The thunder fruit, the strongest natural devil fruit known as Invincible, according to historical records, the owners of the thunder fruit in all generations are extremely powerful and have powers comparable to gods. In reality, the thunder fruit is worthy of its name as the strongest natural system. The ability to move across the void comparable to the speed of light. The terrifying destructive power of natural disasters. The natural elemental ability. Coupled with the heart net amplified by the thunder fruit, the observation hockey is enough to cover the entire island. Such a comprehensive and powerful devil fruit has become one of the most coveted abilities of countless time travelers. In the original plot, the thunder fruit user is Enelu, the arrogant guy who rules Sky Island and calls himself God. But at this time, Enelu is probably just a kid under 10 years old, and the probability of eating the thunder fruit is not high. This means that the thunder fruit is very likely to be in a corner of Sky Island. I am already the user of the magnet fruit, and I cannot have the thunder fruit at the same time. Although it is a pity, Darren does not regret it. If I had not eaten the magnet fruit, I would not know whether I can live to this day. Definitely. Not to mention that the magnet fruit has brought Darren too many surprises. As long as he continues to work hard to develop it, the power of this devil fruit will not be inferior to the thunder fruit, and it may even be better. As for the thunder fruit, such amazing power must be mastered. It must be assigned a potential user, and this person must be someone he can trust. For this, Darren already has a very suitable candidate. In addition to the Thunder Fruit, there is another huge fortune waiting for Darren to discover on Sky Island. Golden Town. That's the gold of an entire city. How much wealth is the Golden Town Sandora worth? Darren doesn't know. Just the little bit that the Straw Hat Pirates took away from Sandora, it was exchanged for 200 million Baileys. Although this was due to inflation and Bailey depreciation after the opening of the Great Pirate Era, it was still amazing enough. Darren made a brief calculation and soon came to an exciting conclusion. If the entire golden city of Sandora was emptied, with the gold reserves of this city, the size of the North Sea Fleet could definitely be expanded more than 10 times on the current basis. Hundreds of modified heavy warships, equipped with various technological weapons and heavy artillery, expanded to 30,000 elite joint combat fleet corps. This scene is exciting to think about. The current North Sea Fleet is still small, but because of too much investment in technology and arms, plus the soldiers, salaries and warship modification and maintenance costs, even if he makes money crazily in the North Sea, he can only barely maintain a balance between income and expenditure. But if he gets all the wealth of the Golden City, it is no exaggeration to say that for at least 5 years, Darren does not need to worry about the military expenses of the North Sea Fleet. With such a huge gold reserve as financial support, Darren can further deploy the development of the North Sea Fleet and implement some plans that do not exist on this sea but exist in the real world. Thinking of this, Darren's eyes lit up. What, you said the Navy headquarters is also short of military funds? That is something that Marshal Kong Gangu and Admiral Zhang Guo need to worry about. The salary of the North Sea Fleet is not paid by the headquarters. 3 days later. North Sea. 321 Branch. Office of the Base Chief. Are all the gifts ready? The flying squirrel wearing a Navy colonel's cloak raised his head from the pile of documents and asked seriously. The young Navy nodded and answered respectfully. Everything is ready. 200 million Baileys of gold and silver treasures, as well as various precious tobacco and alcohol gifts, with a total value of more than 300 million Baileys. It has been properly arranged and will be escorted directly to Rubeck Island by a warship. He paused and asked cautiously. But Admiral Flying Squirrel, the Don Quixote family is just an underground force in the North Sea. Do we need to give him face in this way? The Flying Squirrel glanced at him expressionlessly and suddenly asked an irrelevant question. Tell me, the North Sea Fleet, how does the fleet treat you? The soldier was stunned, and then answered honestly. Very good. The military pay is more than 3 times that of the same level of the headquarters, plus generous bonuses and incentives, enough for any naval soldier's family to live a good life. In addition, we are also equipped with the best food, the most advanced weapons and equipment, and the best training instructors. It can be said that there is absolutely no other army in this sea that can provide such treatment. The Flying Squirrel nodded and asked again. Then do you know why the North Sea Fleet gives you such generous treatment? The young Navy suddenly raised his hand to salute, and said loudly. Unconditionally follow the orders of superiors. He was stunned when he said this, and then instantly understood what the Flying Squirrel meant, blushed, and hesitantly said. Sorry, Admiral Flying Squirrel, it was my subordinate who said too much. The Flying Squirrel smiled and said. There are many unreasonable things in this sea, just like I unconditionally obeyed Admiral Darren's orders. The most important thing for a soldier is often not thinking, but pure execution. The subordinate understands. Thank you, Admiral Flying Squirrel, for your teaching. The young Navy straightened his chest and saluted again. By the way, Admiral Flying Squirrel. He remembered something, picked up a document and asked, there are 3 charity banquets, 2 card games and an auction in the next 3 days. Do you want to attend? Flying Squirrel waved his hand unhappily. Please refuse them all for me. The young Navy learned a lesson this time. He nodded without asking any more questions, and then turned and left. Hey! As the office door slowly closed, Flying Squirrel leaned back with a tired face. He lit a cigar, took a deep puff, and gently pinched his temple with his fingers. This position of the North Sea Admiral is much more troublesome than I thought. He couldn't help but sigh. A voice with a faint teasing smile suddenly sounded. Really? Kaji begged me to come to Beihai to be your deputy. Hearing the sudden voice, the flying squirrel's face became fierce, and he subconsciously pressed the handle of the saber on his waist. But when he turned his head, a look of surprise appeared on his face. Darren. There are only 2 chapters today, so I'll take a short break on Saturday. Please help me, thank you. Chapter 144 The Dilemma of the Flying Squirrel. Why did you come back? Looking at the Commodore who had sat on the sofa next to him with his legs crossed, the alertness and coldness on the flying squirrel's face disappeared instantly, replaced by surprise. He loosened his hand holding the handle of the knife. Didn't you just return to the headquarters not long ago? Darren smiled and said. What's wrong, don't you welcome me back to Beihai? He opened the cigar box on the coffee table without hesitation and took out a cigar from it. He pinched off the tail of the cigar with a cigar cutter, lit it in his mouth, took a deep puff, and squinted his eyes in satisfaction. Well, the cigars from the North Sea are indeed the strongest. The flying squirrel said unhappily. I thought you were still recovering in the headquarters. He suddenly looked at Darren suspiciously, and said in confusion. Why do you look a little unwell? You look thinner. Could it be that your injury is not healed yet? Darren's mouth twitched unconsciously, and he didn't take up the topic, but changed the subject and asked. How is the situation near the North Sea? Speaking of business, the flying squirrel's face returned to seriousness, and he said in a deep voice. It's still the same as when you left, not much has changed. Although you left the North Sea, your reputation still intimidates those nobles and politicians who are ready to make a move. Especially after the news that you took over the chief of the training camp and wiped out the headquarters of the beast pirates began to spread gradually in the past 2 days, I was too busy with the social activities here. Speaking of this, the flying squirrel paused, with a helpless look on his face. Those fat guys are like sharks smelling blood, giving me money and gifts like crazy, and constantly trying to find out information about you at all kinds of drinking parties, card games and banquets. They are so flattering that they even want to send their wives and daughters to my bed. Darren looked at the bitter and sighing flying squirrel and couldn't help but teasing him mischievously. This life sounds very comfortable. Comfortable ass. The flying squirrel cursed angrily and said in grief and indignation. This is simply not a life for human beings. He pounded the desk in indignation. I just want to be a proper navy. Hone my strength, fight pirates, maintain law and order, and uphold justice. But they use money to corrupt my will, use women to destroy my body. Use fine wine and cigarettes to test the righteous cadres. This damn group of guys. Don't you like it? Darren asked suddenly, smiling. The flying squirrel blushed immediately, opened his mouth, but hesitated. That's it. Ha ha ha. Darren couldn't help laughing. It's important to combine work and rest. But you just took office not long ago, it's normal to have such confusion. He blew out a smoke ring from his mouth, with a tone of an experienced person, and said with a smile. Those so-called social events, you can go if you want to, and don't go if you don't want to. Just refuse directly, there's no need to give them face. In the final analysis, this sea is ruled by strength. The flying squirrel nodded. Darren was right. This was their original plan. Although Darren left the North Sea, he actually made more trouble in the Grand Line. The higher you climb in the Navy, the more stable the situation in the North Sea will be. As for the underground world, the Don Quixote family has taken all the underworld forces in the North Sea into their pockets, and now they are developing quite well. They have expanded part of their business to the Grand Line and even the New World. The flying squirrel said again. According to the cooperation agreement, the profits earned by the Don Quixote family must be fixed to the North Sea fleet. This income is called franchise fee in the accounts of the North Sea Navy. By hiring financial experts at high salaries to do the accounting, these huge incomes of unknown origin have naturally become legal income within the power of the North Sea Navy Department, and even the Navy headquarters can't find any faults. Your vision is indeed very sharp. Doflamingo has shown a maturity and sophistication that is completely inconsistent with his age. It's not just strength and leadership. The same is true for business acumen and skills. The flying squirrel looked at Darren in amazement. Sometimes he doesn't know how Darren's head grows. Before Doflamingo appeared, there were actually several powerful mafia families in the North Sea. The leaders of these families had good means and abilities. If Darren allowed them at that time, they would definitely be able to unify the underground world of the North Sea. But Darren never gave in. Until Doflamingo came. It must be admitted that the flying squirrel thought that Darren's decision to let Doflamingo unify the underground world of the North Sea was a bit risky. After all, from the surface, Doflamingo was just a kid of 12 or 13 years old. At this age, other children are still playing in the mud. Rationally, the flying squirrel felt that it was impossible for him to manage the underworld forces in a sea area in an orderly manner. However, out of trust in Darren, the flying squirrel did not express his inner thoughts at the time and obeyed the order unconditionally. Now it seems that Darren's sharp vision is indeed amazing. Well, Dov is really good. I spent a lot of effort to train him. Darren said with a smile. I was able to escape this time thanks to the cadre he sent. But Flying Squirrel, he glanced at Flying Squirrel, you should start to feel the pressure, right? Flying Squirrel's eyes narrowed slightly and pursed his lips. After a long silence, he nodded reluctantly and sighed, he is growing too fast. Yes, Doflamingo is growing too fast. It's so fast that Flying Squirrel feels a little daunted. Especially the last time he personally led the team to Lubeck Island for negotiations, the blonde kid was sitting leisurely on the sofa, which gave Flying Squirrel a creepy feeling of being stared at by a violent beast. Flying Squirrel is not worried about the development of Don Quixote family's power. No matter how strong the Mafia family is, it cannot withstand the fire of the North Sea Fleet. But Doflamingo himself makes Flying Squirrel feel difficult. With unparalleled talent and potential, Flying Squirrel finds that the kid's strength has improved shockingly almost every time they meet. This feeling makes him feel strongly uneasy. That is why, during the last negotiation, he brought the warships of the North Sea Fleet to surround Lubeck Island and was ready to stage a small, demon-slaying order, at any time to raise the Don Quixote family to the ground. After all, if something really happened to Darren in the New World, Flying Squirrel did not have much confidence that he could suppress Doflamingo by his own strength. Darren naturally noticed the difficulty of Flying Squirrel. This is also the reason why I came back this time. He said with a smile. I am grateful for everything. Chapter 145 Like eating shit. Darren has long been aware of the difficulties of Flying Squirrel. He knows Doflamingo's talent better than anyone else. He awakened the Conqueror's Haki at the age of 8. A seemingly useless string fruit was developed by him into a terrifying ability that combines attack, control, self-healing, clones, and large-scale extermination and massacre. This innate potential is unique in the entire pirate world. In addition to his cold-blooded, cruel and inhumane temperament and personality, to be honest, there are not many people who can be compared with him in this sea. Although Flying Squirrel has good talent, in the original plot, he is an elite vice admiral of the headquarters and the mainstay of justice, performing various difficult tasks, but compared with Doflamingo, a natural, dark king, he is still slightly inferior. The most important thing is that in the absence of the opportunity to master Haki in the early stage, the advantage of Devil Fruit ability users in strength is overwhelming. Maybe Flying Squirrel can still barely suppress Doflamingo with his superb swordsmanship and rich combat experience, but as time goes by, the pressure he faces will inevitably increase, and he may even be overtaken in the end. This is an undeniable fact. As for the solution, it is actually very simple. Send Flying Squirrel to the officer training camp, create a time difference, let him master the 6 styles and Haki as soon as possible, and grow up quickly. But this method there are 2 difficulties. First, the next officer elite training camp is still quite far away, and the Flying Squirrel needs to improve its strength urgently. Second, with the Flying Squirrel's talent, the Navy 6 styles may be mastered quickly, but the domineering power is not necessarily. So the final solution is only one. I brought you a gift from the Grand Line. Facing the Flying Squirrel's puzzled eyes, Darren smiled. A gift that can make you reborn and gain an epic leap in strength. Gift. Thing. A hint of doubt flashed in the flying squirrel's eyes, and he asked curiously. "What is it?" Darren waved his hand, and a metal box with a smooth surface floated in from the window with a stable flight trajectory. A devil fruit. As the faint blue arc danced between Darren's fingers, the surface of the metal box rippled, and then split to both sides, revealing what was inside. The moment he saw the thing in front of him, the flying squirrel's eyes froze instantly. He stared at the strange fruit in the metal box, which exuded a strange, mysterious and even destructive aura, and tried to identify it carefully. His lips were tightly pursed, and his expression was extremely serious. After a while, his eyes suddenly widened, and his expression was extremely shocked. He, who was always calm, couldn't help but exclaim. This is. Yes, the strongest natural fruit. Thunder fruit. Darren was very satisfied with the reaction of the flying squirrel and laughed. The legendary devil fruit actually exists, and you found it. The flying squirrel looked at the fruit in disbelief, his hands even trembled a little, and his eyes could no longer move away. It was a strange fruit that was golden and shaped like a pineapple. There were lightning-like patterns on its surface, exuding a violent and mysterious aura. The legendary thunder fruit. It is known as the strongest natural fruit. If you take this devil fruit, you will gain extremely powerful power. This is different from ordinary natural devil fruits. Thunder originally symbolizes natural disasters. Possessing the destructive power of natural disasters. As the Admiral of the North Sea and Darren's deputy, Flying Squirrel has also seen the devil fruit illustrations through Darren's channels. After all, the devil fruit, known as the secret treasure of the sea, is a rare commodity in itself, and they have tried to collect devil fruits in the North Sea over the years. So almost the moment he saw this devil fruit, he recognized this legendary ability. But the first reaction was a little unbelievable. This is a natural devil fruit that can keep pace with the three monsters in the headquarters. And now, Darren is going to give it to himself. It is absolutely impossible for Flying Squirrel to say that he is not tempted. However. No. Flying Squirrel suddenly took a deep breath, forced his eyes away from the thunder fruit, and gritted his teeth and said. This is a legendary fruit, you should keep it for yourself, Darren. There were traces of blood in his eyes, but he stared at Darren very solemnly. Darren pinched his temple helplessly and said. Have you forgotten that I am already the user of the magnet fruit? One person cannot take two devil fruits at the same time. The consequence of greed is to explode and die. This is the iron law of devil fruits. I don't plan to commit suicide. Blackbeard can become a double devil fruit user, which may be related to his special physique. The temptation of the double fruit is indeed great, but Darren does not want to gamble his life. At least there is no need to gamble his life in such a place. Flying Squirrel was stunned when he heard this. He forgot about this matter for a while in a hurry. But he still shook his head. Then you should also give this thunder fruit to a more suitable person. A hint of gloom flashed in his eyes. My talent and potential are probably not enough to control it. The development of devil fruits has an upper limit, and this has a lot to do with the user himself. No matter how powerful a devil fruit is, if it falls into the hands of an incompetent person, the power it develops will be extremely limited. Darren was a little angry and amused when he heard this. I never thought that the gifts I gave out would be rejected by someone. He shook his head and looked at the Flying Squirrel seriously. Don't underestimate yourself, Flying Squirrel. In my opinion, you are the most suitable candidate. The Flying Squirrel pursed his lips, pondered for 2 seconds, and shook his head. No, this gift is too expensive. Darren glanced at him, exhaled a puff of smoke, and suddenly said something irrelevant. In the year 1487 of the Haiyuan calendar, I was 14 years old that year and had just joined the 321st branch of the North Sea. My position was the lowest private soldier. At that time, my physical fitness was very good. The quality is very poor. Even the most basic physical training can cost me half my life. However, according to the rules of recruits, in addition to daily training, I must also be responsible for the cleaning of the military department. That day, When I dragged my tired body and took a brush to clean the toilet, I suddenly fainted. You found me and carried me to the hospital. When I woke up, the toilet had been cleaned, and I avoided military punishment." The flying squirrel was stunned and waved his hand disapprovingly. "It's just a piece of cake." Darren ignored his words and just continued to talk to himself. "Hai Yuan Li in 1488, I participated in a combat mission for the first time. The target was the Blood Scythe pirates. I was so scared that I couldn't even hold my saber steady. I was almost cut in half by a pirate's axe. You pulled me back and saved my life. And you were shot because of that." The flying squirrel opened his mouth to say something, but Darren didn't give him a chance and continued. "In 1489 of the Sea Circle calendar, you and I were promoted to lieutenants at the same time. We were full of energy. We led a team of 20 people to clean up the underworld forces on an island. It was a trap. The entire team was ambushed and trapped in an alley. All the subordinates died. I was shot twice and stabbed 3 times, and finally lost consciousness and fell into a coma. When I woke up later, I was already in the hospital. The person lying on the bed next to you was you. You look much worse than me. The doctor told me that you rushed out of that alley carrying me, who was seriously injured and unconscious, and you were shot 5 times and stabbed 6 times. He glanced at the left foot of the flying squirrel. There is still a shrapnel in your knee that has not been removed, so you have not dared to use your left foot for many years." Darren smoked a cigarette and smiled. The smile was a little light, but there was a heavy feeling in his eyes. "Do you need me to continue? Others don't remember, and the military merit book doesn't record it, but I remember it all. 5 years have passed since I joined the Navy. In these 5 years, including the time when I was cleaning the toilet, you have saved me 13 times in total. Tell me, if I go out to risk my life, how much is the value of me, a big man with a prominent reputation, the King of the North Sea, who dominates the North Sea, the monster of the Navy headquarters, the rising star of the Navy who killed the world destroyer, Bondi Waldo, and wiped out the headquarters of the Beast Pirates?" The flying squirrel fell silent. He gradually understood what Darren meant and whispered, "It is inestimable." "Yes, it is inestimable." Darren laughed. "But you have saved such an inestimable life 13 times. The flying squirrel pouted and said, "You have saved me more times, okay." Darren was speechless and said unhappily, "Is it time to settle this with you now? I mean, we have fought side by side for so many years, and we have such a good relationship. Why are you still hesitating? I don't have many friends, and I don't trust others. You are one of the few people I can trust in this sea." The flying squirrel hesitated. "But itm." Darren was immediately furious, and before the flying squirrel could react, he waved his hand. Clang clang. The metal wristband flew out, melted and separated at lightning speed, forming several objects similar to shackles, which quickly wrapped around the flying squirrel's hands and feet. "Nailed him to the ground. Darren, you." The flying squirrel's face changed, and he screamed subconsciously. But Darren took this opportunity to grab the thunder fruit with one hand. He stuffed it into the flying squirrel's mouth. The juice splashed everywhere. The flying squirrel was stunned for a moment, his eyes frozen. The next second, "Darren, you damn bastard. This thing." He roared, his face flushed, his expression twisted, he coughed and vomited violently, and tears burst out of the corners of his eyes. "It's like eating shit. Please help me, thank you very much." Chapter 146. Congratulations on becoming an electric mouse. How do you know what shit tastes like? Have you ever eaten it? Looking at the flying squirrel lying there retching and blushing, Darren couldn't help but laugh triumphantly. The taste of the devil fruit is indeed unbearable. It is a smell of sewer rot mixed with foot odor. It tastes bitter and astringent. It is just like a nightmare. If you have tasted it once, you will never want to eat it again. You bastard. Hearing Darren sitting on the sofa and smoking slowly and teasing, the flying squirrel was so angry that his face turned red. He resisted the acid reflux in his stomach and struggled to resist. But his hands and feet were nailed to the ground by metal. Under the strong magnetic field, he had some difficulty in exerting force. Suddenly, the flying squirrel felt his head suddenly empty, as if a magical power suddenly surged in his body. In the office, the flying squirrel burst into dazzling lightning, as if tens of millions of birds were screaming at the same time. Under the stunned expression of the flying squirrel, he watched in shock as his body visibly melted and turned into a large piece of blue plasma. The hands and feet that turned into lightning penetrated the metal that restricted their movements, and like a fluid, they flexibly got rid of Darren's restraints. The flickering lightning reconstructed the figure of the flying squirrel again. He stood there, looking at his hands that burst into lightning with surprise and joy, feeling the violent power that continued to surge in his body, and for a moment he was unable to react. With a clang, a black, old shrapnel broke out from his left knee and fell to the ground, making a crisp sound. When the flying squirrel saw the shrapnel, he was slightly stunned, and then his eyes became a little complicated. He could clearly feel that with the fall of this shrapnel, the chronic pain that had tortured his knee joints for many years gradually disappeared. This is elementalization. Congratulations, your body has turned into lightning. Darren lit a cigar again and said with a smile. How does it feel? The flying squirrel carefully felt the changes in his body. He seemed to feel that his body seemed to become very light, like a feather, without any weight. But as long as he wanted, he seemed to be able to burst out with devastating power at any time. Of course, the flying squirrel also knew that this was just a physical illusion caused by the sudden increase in power after he ate the thunder fruit. He took a deep breath and tried to control the somewhat manic devil fruit ability with his will. With his efforts, the lightning jumping all over his body gradually converged and soon returned to normal. Unprecedented, powerful. The flying squirrel was silent for a moment, exhaled a long breath, looked up at Darren, and said slowly. Darren smiled. This shit is not bad, right? Flying squirrel. Darren took a puff of cigar, as if he remembered something, and said with interest. Let's go to the training ground to try it out. A weird and funny idea flashed through his mind. The flying squirrel ate the thunder fruit, so he became a lightning mouse. The flying squirrel was stunned, and his eyes were full of eagerness to try. Okay. He also wanted to know how powerful the thunder fruit was. And what kind of power he could exert. Hey, who's the person next to the captain of the flying squirrel base? It's Lord Darren. Lord Darren is back. Lord Darren, how is life at the headquarters? I heard that you fought Kaido, the beast. Quote. On the way to the training ground, Darren's appearance quickly attracted the attention of the Navy soldiers. They looked at the Navy Commodore with his hands in his pockets with surprise, and the admiration and fanaticism in their eyes were indescribable. The name Rogers Darren has a legendary and irreplaceable meaning for the North Sea Navy. Under his command, the North Sea Navy has completely become the overlord of the North Sea. Even the lowest level soldiers enjoy treatment that other armies can't imagine. It can be said without hesitation that the scale and strength of the North Sea Fleet today are only related to this name. Therefore, every member of the North Sea Navy admires and appreciates this legendary navy from the bottom of their hearts. Even though Darren has resigned from his post as the North Sea Admiral and went to the Navy headquarters in Marineford for training, any news and information about Darren that reaches the North Sea will cause the Navy soldiers to scramble for it. Rogers Darren's strength is the strength of their North Sea Fleet. Rogers Darren's glory is the glory of their North Sea Fleet. Long time no see, everyone. Darren looked at the North Sea Navy who heard the news and rushed over, with a hearty smile on his face and waved at them. After chatting with the soldiers for a few words, Darren smiled and asked the Navy soldiers to return to their posts. The soldiers saluted in unison and left immediately. Soon the school field became empty. The cold sea breeze blew unstoppably, rolling up waves of howling yellow sand. Darren and the flying squirrel were 10 meters apart, looking at each other from a distance. Come on, attack me with all the moves you can imagine. Darren said. The flying squirrel had just eaten the thunder fruit, and the use of this devil fruit was almost blank, and the degree of development was infinitely close to zero. This test was simply to see his understanding of this devil fruit. The flying squirrel hesitated. Are you sure? The power of the thunder fruit, I feel like it's a bit. Forget it, I almost forgot your monster-like physique. He slapped his forehead unhappily and stopped hesitating. The flying squirrel took a deep breath, raised his hand flat, and locked Darren in the air. Discharge 100,000 volts. The moment the voice fell, his entire arm suddenly turned into a jumping lightning, and then quickly condensed into a roaring thunder and whipped towards Darren. The thunder twisted and tore the air, and the earth became charred wherever it passed, as if it contained high temperature. Although Darren's physique was abnormally strong, the flying squirrel did not use his strongest strength for the sake of safety. Facing the flying squirrel's attack, Darren did not dodge or avoid, and let the lightning hit him directly. Ziz! It was like a heavy artillery bombardment, and even made the flying squirrel feel that the whole school field trembled. It seems that I have to put some pressure on you, Darren said with a twisted smile. The flying squirrel's face changed drastically, and his pupils suddenly contracted. He couldn't see Darren's movements at all. A fist wrapped in a solemn black light had been wildly enlarged in the reflection of his pupils. Flying squirrel, at %. Ask for everything, thank you very much. Chapter 147. Can you do it? What a fast burst speed. Darren, this madman, how long has he been in the headquarters? The strength has skyrocketed to the point that he can't see it at all. What did he do? Did he take any drugs? The flying squirrel's heart suddenly beat wildly, and the corners of his eyes trembled wildly. In his eyes, Darren's figure was as fast as lightning, and he couldn't catch it at all. He came in front of him in the blink of an eye. Under the horrible inhuman force, the black fist's progressive penetration seemed to penetrate the air directly. You want to kill. Bang. The fist hit the flying squirrel's face heavily. If time slows down, you can even see the muscles on his face become twisted under this punch in slow motion, rippling like waves. The next second, his figure shot out like a cannonball, and on the trajectory of flight, he hit several human-shaped stone targets in succession before sinking deeply into a 3-meter-high turret. Accompanied by a huge roar, the turret turned into waste in an instant, and billowing smoke and dust rose up. Only enough pressure can allow you to adapt to and master the power of the thunder fruit as soon as possible. Darren exhaled a breath of smoke with a smile, and felt that all the pores on his body were comfortably opened, and even the taste of this cigar was much better. The feeling of bullying is so cool. In the past half-month, I have been fighting against opponents stronger than myself. First, I joined forces with Sakaski to encircle Barrett. At that time, my strength was still a certain distance from Barrett, and the use of armament hockey was not mature enough, so I could only let Sakaski act as the main attacker. Then I was captured alive by Kaido and tortured by Quinn. In the end, I escaped from prison and did not gain any advantage against Quinn and Kaido. After escaping, I immediately faced Kazuki Oden and Whitebeard. Although it was fun to talk big for a while, Darren finally realized that he was still far from Whitebeard, the strongest man in the world. In general, Darren has been a little depressed in the past few days. Whitebeard and Kaido are fine. Even Gion and Ashi came to bully him. Now that I finally got the chance, I must release the pressure. If you are a brother, come and chop me. You bastard. You are really merciless. A hoarse and angry voice came from the ruins of the artillery turret with smoke and dust. Swish. Bundles of hot thunder suddenly shot out like water splashes, directly piercing through the rocks and quickly gathered into a human shape. The flying squirrel wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, his face visibly swollen, and stared at Darren with anger. Are you putting pressure on me? You want to kill me? Oh. Darren scratched his head helplessly and said innocently. I didn't. He suddenly grinned. You survived, didn't you? Besides, it seems that you are more familiar with the mastery of elementalization. Aren't you talking nonsense? If I can't elementalize as soon as possible, I'm afraid that the punch just now will give me a concussion. The flying squirrel was suddenly stunned. He looked down at his hands with clear palm lines and clenched his fists tentatively. Thunder suddenly burst out from his hands of flesh and blood, and a second later, they returned to flesh and blood again, constantly changing. The flying squirrel slightly widened his eyes, somewhat unbelievable, and murmured. It seems to be true. The transformation between elementalization and entity has become more flexible, not as difficult and stagnant as at the beginning. Now you understand. I have used the most efficient training techniques of the officer training camp. Darren talked nonsense seriously. The flying squirrel stared at Darren with suspicion, and asked doubtfully. Are you sure you don't just want to beat me up? Darren nodded naturally. I have this plan. Flying squirrel. But this is indeed meant to train you. Darren said slowly. You have also noticed my strength, right? Compared to when I just left the North Sea, it has increased a lot. I use this training method. The flying squirrel always felt that something was wrong, and squinted. What is the name of your training method? Darren straightened his chest and said righteously. You will become stronger if you get beaten. Darren, you bastard. The flying squirrel's eyes turned red visibly, and violent electric currents suddenly burst out from the surface of his body, wrapping around his body like a blue flame and rising. He suddenly raised his hand, and a half-meter thick, dragon-like lightning roared towards Darren. The previous attack left room for maneuver. The flying squirrel's attack this time was several times more powerful and larger in scale. Very good, it's more powerful. And the aura began to increase in the induction of the biomagnetic field. Darren's eyes narrowed, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He didn't know about the development of the thunder fruit. But one thing that can be confirmed is, in a limited time, actual combat and external pressure are often the best ways to force out human potential. The most important thing is, he was pleasantly surprised to find that his body's stagnant physical data, under the lightning strike of the flying squirrel just now, actually showed a trend of loosening and growth again. This made Darren overjoyed. You know, after being strengthened by Teacher Quinn, his physical body has been tempered to an unimaginable degree, and he is getting closer and closer to Kaido's indestructible body. But since then, except for the fight with Kazuki Odin, Darren's physical data has been dead stagnant and has never been improved. But now, there is a chance for his physique to rise again. How could he miss it? Come on, Pikachu, charge me. Darren murmured with his eyes shining, and under the dumbfounded expression of the flying squirrel. He dove into the violent thunder. Boom. The high-pitched explosion that almost pierced the clouds and cracked the rocks exploded in the training ground, and the billowing black smoke turned into a fiery red mushroom cloud and rushed into the sky. Half an hour later, Darren, whose body surface was full of charred black, kicked the flying squirrel lying there panting with excitement, and said with fanatical eyes. Hey, keep going, it's only 5 million volts. Can you do it? The flying squirrel panted heavily and collapsed on the ground with weakness. His face was as pale as a dead person, his eye sockets were sunken, his expression was listless, and his face was blue and purple. At this time, the ground of the school field was full of charred pits and black smoke, as if it were a ruin. Hearing Darren's words, the flying squirrel shuddered all over. No, it's really no. He was so tired that he couldn't even lift a finger, and he wanted to cry but had no tears. I'm grateful for everything. Chapter 148. I'm not interested in money. Is that all? Darren looked at the flying squirrel with contempt, his expression full of regret. Flying squirrel, #%#. I just ate the thunder fruit. It's pretty good to hold on for half an hour under such an intense explosion. He rolled his eyes in annoyance, and lay flat on the ground of the school field, half-closed his eyes comfortably, panting and adjusting his breathing. Darren, this madman, used the strength of his body to bear his thunder bombardment, and he became more and more excited, and the smile on his face became more and more perverted. What's going on? I always feel that this guy has become more and more abnormal after going to the Grand Line. Wait. Is this the getting stronger by getting beaten training method? Darren didn't lie to me. While the flying squirrel was thinking about it, Darren sighed with regret and also lay down on the training ground to rest. Using the flying squirrel's attack with the thunder fruit to forge his own physique, Darren didn't expect it at first. But I have to say that the effect is really good. In just half an hour, under the lightning strike of nearly 5 million volts, his physical data has been improved by nearly 1 point. 1 point may not seem much, but Darren has not forgotten that his physique has grown to an exaggerated degree that ordinary people can hardly imagine. After exceeding 70 points, the improvement speed of various data of the body has long become extremely slow. In just half an hour, you can get a little improvement, which is much better than thinking about anti-strike training. Although half an hour had passed, his body had gradually adapted to the lightning strikes of the flying squirrel. But it was only 5 million volts. As the flying squirrel continued to develop the thunder fruit, the strength of his lightning strikes would naturally continue to increase. 10 million volts, 30 million volts, 50 million volts, 100 million volts. Even Enelus who reached or even exceeded 300 million volts. Thinking of this, Darren looked at the flying squirrel as if he was looking at a great treasure. He had a feeling that as long as he continued to use thunder to temper his body, he would be able to make his physical strength infinitely close to Kaido's indestructible body. Then, will there be a day when he can take a lightning strike from Big Mom as if nothing had happened, just like the sun god, and then shout, "Because I have perseverance." Thinking of this, Darren laughed dumbly. His mind gradually immersed in the data of his body. Physique, 79.812. Strength, 70.513. Speed, 70.899. Armament Haki, 37.035. Conqueror Haki, 52.301. Well, along with the physical strength that has increased during this period, it has also produced a strong spillover effect on armament Haki, and the strength of Haki has also become much stronger. As for other items, well, the improvement is not obvious. But in general, it is considered to be a new idea. And Darren believes that as the intensity of thunder body forging continues to increase, the strength of the physique will also be reflected in strength and speed. After all, the strengthening of skin, muscles and bones is also an extremely important part of the overall development of the body. Flying squirrel, have you thought about your title of general? Darren suddenly turned his head and looked at the bruised Navy colonel next to him, and said with a smile, "Admiral." Flying Squirrel was stunned when he heard this, and then laughed disapprovingly. "You are really confident in me. He is the Admiral of the Navy, known as the world government's highest combat power. For a freak like you, becoming an Admiral of the Navy is just a matter of time, but for ordinary people like us." He looked at the blue sky with white clouds floating in his eyes calmly, with an inexplicable melancholy and yearning in his eyes, and murmured in a low voice, "That is a dream that can never be realized in a lifetime." "That's not necessarily true." Darren smiled, his eyes flashing with deep brilliance. "Don't underestimate your potential. In the original plot, Flying Squirrel is one of the few elite vice admirals of the Navy headquarters, the mainstay of the justice force of the entire world, and is definitely not weak in terms of talent and potential. He is deeply trusted by the top leaders of the headquarters. He is strong and ranks among the top vice admirals in both physical and swordsmanship. He is proficient in using two-color domineering and has even carried out the mandatory summoning mission of the Pirate Queen. Based on such strength, if he is given a thunder fruit, let alone other things, as long as he develops to the same level as Enel, it should not be difficult to barely enter the level of Admiral-level combat power. After all, even a fake like Green Bull can become a Navy Admiral. Not to mention, I can also help him. Let's talk about it later." Hearing Darren's meaningful words, the Flying Squirrel pondered for a moment, secretly clenched his fists, and said slowly. As he said, becoming a Navy Admiral is the dream of every Navy. If it is possible, even if the chance must be slim, he will strive for it, and he will not regret it even if he sacrifices his life for it. How long do you plan to stay this time? Darren lit a cigarette, rested his head on his back, and said while smoking, "I didn't plan to stay for a long time, but now it's different." "Why?" The Flying Squirrel was stunned. Darren blinked at him and said with a smile, "I'll stay to help you develop the thunder fruit." "Flying Squirrel. You just want me to be a tool and use lightning to help you temper your body." The corners of his eyes twitched. Now he understood. What helping me develop the thunder fruit is all an excuse. Maybe there is this reason, but Darren, this bastard, wants me to help him practice. But the flying squirrel is numb to this. He also knows that Darren's unique way of practicing. Most people can't stand it. By the way, I almost forgot this. Darren muttered, took out a magnetic pointer from his arms and handed it to the flying squirrel. This is. The flying squirrel frowned. Darren said casually. This is a magnetic pointer pointing to an unknown island. There is a fortune left by me on the island. I plan to use it all for the development and expansion of the North Sea Fleet. A fortune. Why don't you keep it for yourself? The expenses at the headquarters should be quite large, right? The flying squirrel shook his head and refused. The military expenditure of the North Sea Fleet is sufficient for the time being. The tax revenue obtained by Doflamingo is increasing rapidly every month. Besides, if you want to expand the North Sea Fleet, the wealth required is not something that can be solved by 100 million or 200 million Baileys. The flying squirrel didn't think Darren could get any money from Marineford. After all, with so many high-ranking naval officials, he would never blatantly use the North Sea's tricks on the Navy headquarters. Of course I know that the cost of expanding the North Sea Fleet is an astronomical figure, so I found this fortune for you. Darren said unhappily. The flying squirrel looked at him doubtfully and said suspiciously. How much money is there on that island? Darren shrugged and said. I don't know either. You know I'm not interested in money, but roughly speaking, there should be hundreds of billions of Baileys. What? The flying squirrel opened his eyes wide and couldn't believe his ears. He was so scared that he almost dropped the magnetic pointer in his hand and broke it. I had an allergy today and went to the hospital for treatment. I'm sorry for the late update. Chapter 149. You didn't rob the gold in the sky, did you? Hundreds of billions. The flying squirrel sat up suddenly, staring at Darren with his jaw almost falling to the ground, and stammered. Darren, are you kidding? He carefully held the magnetic pointer in his hand, as if he was holding a rare treasure. Darren said unhappily. Am I the kind of person who likes to make such jokes? It's just a few billion Baileys of gold. Why are you so excited? Having said that, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Where did you get the gold? The flying squirrel looked unbelievable, and then suddenly froze, as if he thought of something, and his face suddenly changed. Darren, didn't you go to rob the gold in the sky? Said this, his expression changed and his voice was very low. No, don't worry, the source of this money is completely legitimate. Darren shook his head. Well, but you reminded me that when I don't have enough money in the future, Tianshengjian seems to be a good idea. He stroked the blue stubble on his chin. Flying squirrel. Several black lines floated on his forehead, and he was crazy in his heart. No, you are still thinking about it seriously. Well, this is indeed a very good idea, you are worthy of being my adjutant. Darren suddenly patted the flying squirrel's shoulder with satisfaction, smiling. Flying squirrel. It's not me, I don't have it, you are talking nonsense. Seeing the always serious flying squirrel with a confused expression, Darren couldn't help laughing and explained. Don't worry, this money comes from a legendary place. The legend of the Golden Country. Have you heard of it? The flying squirrel nodded. Well, the Golden Country Shandora is said to exist in the sky above 10,000 meters, but that's just an illusory legend. Wait, have you found the legendary Golden Country? He suddenly looked at Darren with wide eyes. Where do you think your thunder fruit came from? Darren blew out a smoke ring and said lightly. The flying squirrel suddenly realized. It turns out that the Golden Country Shandora actually exists. No wonder. He now understands it. No wonder Darren found the thunder fruit that disappeared for more than 100 years. No wonder he suddenly had such a huge fortune. If he found the legendary Golden Country, then all this can be understood. It is precisely because the thunder fruit exists in the Sky Island at an altitude of 10,000 meters that there has been no trace of it in this sea for more than 100 years. Anyway, when the time comes, you can take a group of trustworthy people and drive a few warships to this island, keep it as secret as possible to avoid leaking the news, and bring back all the gold. Darren said slowly. The flying squirrel raised his eyebrows and said hesitantly. You don't think anyone in the North Sea dares to rob the gold of our North Sea fleet? Darren shook his head and pinched his temple with a headache. That's not the case. I'm not worried about pirates or mafia forces. What worries me is that if the headquarters knows that we have such a large sum of money, I guess that guy Zhongguo will show up at the door of the 321st branch the next day. I guess he'll be like a poor guy every day. Even when he goes to the toilet, he has to squat at the door with a smile on his face. He won't be able to take a shit in peace. Flying squirrel. He thought for a while, his mouth twitched slightly, and after a moment, he slowly said. You're right. Although Darren's words were exaggerated, they were not without reason. If the headquarters knew that the North Sea Fleet had such a huge sum of money, they would definitely not let it go. It's unlikely to rob it by force, after all, Darren's strength and status are here. But with Zhongguo's means, there is always a way to dig out a large part. Besides, once the headquarters opens its mouth, they can't really withstand the pressure and not give a penny. That would be equivalent to a falling out with the headquarters. Anyway, once you have the money, you should act as soon as possible, expand the army, and expand the number of warships of the North Sea Fleet to at least 20 ships within a year. Darren narrowed his eyes and said. In addition, if I remember correctly, Borsellino should have deployed some of the latest technological weapons to the North Sea, right? Flying Squirrel nodded. Yes, the laser weapons of the Ministry of Science have been installed on some warships of the North Sea Fleet. Speaking of this, his eyes gradually lit up with a fiery light. The power of this laser weapon is unprecedented. After preliminary tests, this weapon is enough to easily blow up a ship with 100 people. It was because of the blessing of the laser cannon that the Flying Squirrel dared to blockade the Rubeck Island unscrupulously, ready to raise the Don Quixote family to the ground at any time. All fear comes from the lack of firepower. The trouble is that this laser weapon consumes a lot of energy, and the charging method is very complicated. We haven't mastered the specific method and energy source yet. Darren frowned and said. That is to say, although this thing is very powerful, the core technology is still firmly controlled by the science and technology troops led by Borsellino. Flying Squirrel nodded. Yes, so for the time being, the main attack weapon used by our North Sea Fleet is still mainly traditional heavy artillery, supplemented by some technological weapons of Germa 66. And in order to hide the true scale of the fleet, the purchase volume we submitted to the Ministry of Science is only 5 warships. Well, I understand. The real mature use of laser weapons in the original plot is to be mounted on the pacifist, but the specific charging method is not shown. Darren thought for a moment, and suddenly said. Dismantle a laser cannon from the warship and give it to Vinsmoke Judge, and let him, are you sure that guy can do it? The Flying Squirrel asked hesitantly. At least for now, the power of Germa 66's technological weapons is far less than that of the laser cannon of the science department. Darren nodded. Vinsmoke Judge used to work with Vegapunk, and the technology mastered by the Navy Science and Technology Department is just the scraps of Vegapunk's most advanced scientific research technology. With Vinsmoke Judge's level, it shouldn't be difficult to crack and modify the energy supply structure of the laser cannon. The reason why Germa 66's technological weapons are poor is that Vinsmoke Judge's research and development focus is not on weapons but more on human genetic modification. When Darren saw the newly born Vinsmoke Reiju last time, he saw the traces of bloodline factor modification. Of course, in terms of cracking and modifying laser cannon weapons. In terms of technology, the fat guy Quinn is actually a more suitable candidate. After all, Darren saw him release the laser cannon trick in the Beast Pirates base camp. But the fat guy in overalls is not his subordinate. No problem, just modify the laser weapon charging structure. What energy do you want to use to power it? The Flying Squirrel asked again. Darren didn't say anything, just looked at him with a smile. The Flying Squirrel thought for a while, and his face quickly turned black. Hash. @%. Ask for everything, thank you. Chapter 150 North Sea Festival. Darren scratched his ears and ignored the complaints of the Flying Squirrel next to him. This trip to Sky Island yielded much more than he had imagined, and he did not encounter any obstacles along the way. He first found the Thunder Fruit in an abandoned temple, and then went straight to the golden town of Sandora, using the power of the magnetic fruit to move all the gold there. As for other specialties on Sky Island, such as weapons like impact shells, Darren was not very interested. That thing has no meaning for the strong, but if it is used to equip the North Sea Fleet, the number is far from enough, which seems quite useless. For the military, only reproducible standard equipment has application significance. This is why he wants to transform the laser cannon of the Navy Science and Technology Department. In key technologies such as military weapons, we can't be stuck. Otherwise, every time the energy of the laser cannon is exhausted, the Navy Science and Technology Department has to help refill the energy, which is really uncomfortable to operate. As for the energy filling after the transformation, it was originally a problem. But now that the flying squirrel has the Thunder Fruit, this problem is naturally solved. In addition, we can further transform the warship here. Darren suddenly remembered something and squinted. Transform the warship? Do you mean that the main keel of the warship is made of metal? The North Sea Fleet has been doing that. The flying squirrel was stunned when he heard this, and replied. The North Sea Fleet and Germa 66 have cooperated to transform the warships a long time ago. By adding some shape memory metals and lightweight alloys to replace the traditional wood as the keel of the warship, not only can a stronger defense be obtained, but also it can cooperate with Darren's Devil Fruit ability to form a flying fleet. Although this transformation method is very expensive, plus the cost of the transformation and the heavy artillery and technological weapons on the hull, the cost of each warship has exceeded 300 million Baileys, but this money is definitely worth it. Darren's design blueprint for the North Sea Fleet is not only sea control, but also air control. No. Darren shook his head. That's one aspect. Now I want to transform the power system of the warship. Power system. The flying squirrel was startled, and then a bad premonition came into his mind, and the corner of his mouth twitched. You don't mean to. Darren smiled and said. Electrification is the mainstream of the future. With electricity as the power source, the speed of warships can be greatly improved, at least twice that of warships of the same size or even higher. This will undoubtedly enhance the combat power of our North Sea Fleet. And in this way we can also get rid of the traditional power system, and even remove the mast to reduce the weight of the warship. The North Sea Fleet's actions are more convenient and rapid. I don't need to remind you of its tactical significance, right? Flying squirrel. His face was as pale as an eggplant hit by frost, and he said with tears in his eyes. You are simply a devil. It is true that I ate your Thunder Fruit, but I am a Thunder Fruit user. Not a Charge Fruit user. If I continue like this, I will probably have to provide energy to the fleet day and night. Thinking of the inhumane scene, Flying Squirrel wanted to die. However, he had to admit that Darren's plan for the North Sea Fleet was it is indeed full of vision and expectation. Why do you think I gave you the Thunder Fruit? Darren raised his lips and couldn't help laughing. North Sea, Lubeck Island. Flowers and balloons piled up at the clean and tidy harbor, and ships with different flags slowly sailed in. The island was decorated with lights and colors everywhere. The shops lined up with 50% off, discount signs, and the streets were crowded with people. Major traders, the leaders and representatives of the team came here early, and the royal families and nobles of various countries also sent their own representatives to attend the birthday party of Don Quixote da Flamingo, the head of the Don Quixote family in the North Sea. What a grand occasion. I didn't expect that a mere 10-year-old kid could develop his power to this extent. Shish. Keep your voice down, do you want to die? Don't look at Doflamingo as just a kid, but his means and strength are second to none in the North Sea. I heard that his caravan and power have already radiated to the Grand Line. The crowd gathered in twos and threes, whispering. Some people admired, some sneered, some ridiculed, and some worshipped. But soon, the appearance of a uniquely shaped ship suddenly attracted everyone's attention. It was a warship like a military fortress, with turrets and blockhouses arranged on it, and a flag with the word, 66, printed on it fluttering in the wind. This is The ship of Germa 66. The Vinsmoke family is here to celebrate too. Damn it. Don't let Germa 66 target you. The originally lively crowd quickly dispersed, carefully making way for a wide road. Soon, Vinsmoke Judge, with long golden hair and armor, landed on the shore with a group of cyborg soldiers in black suits. That kid Doflamingo has managed this island very well. Vinsmoke Judge ignored the vigilant and fearful eyes of the people around him, casually glanced at the streets around him, and sneered. Master of the Vinsmoke family, my young master has been waiting for a long time, please come this way. At this time, a deep voice sounded in front of him. Vinsmoke Judge was stunned, and saw a young figure with a backcombed hair and elegant temperament like a gentleman slowly, floating, out from the ground. I am a member of the Don Quixote family, Senior. Senior, wearing a straight peaked lapel suit and a pocket square on his chest, bowed slightly and performed an elegant etiquette. Vinsmoke Judge frowned calmly. He didn't even notice the arrival of this guy. It's really not easy. Well, I haven't seen your young master for a long time. A false smile appeared on his face. Vinsmoke Judge raised his hand, and several men in black suits behind him carried a heavy box from the battleship. This is a birthday gift from the Vinsmoke family to your young master. Senior smiled and said, thank you for the gift from the Vinsmoke family. I accept it on behalf of the young master. This way, please. He raised his hand to signal. Vinsmoke Judge nodded, just raised his foot, but put it back. No hurry, you have other guests coming. He turned around slowly, squinting his eyes and looked at the sea not far away. In that direction, a heavily armed and huge warship was breaking through the waves at a steady speed and sailing towards Lubeck Island. I am not feeling well, so I am sorry for the late update. I ask for everything, and I will be grateful.